Good morning, by the way. Sorry, I started making funny noises there to convey sort of a deep thinking and confusion before I'd actually told you anything much about what we were going to be talking about. So I've got quite a lot to get through today, would you believe? I have got a new feature to launch. It's exciting, isn't it? And I'm going to need your help in coming up with a name. And I'm also going to need your help in remembering that we have launched a new feature. Because, you know, we have a very embarrassing habit on this programme of coming up with brilliant ideas and then forgetting about them for about a month and then remembering them a month later and thinking, why haven't we done that more? And then getting cross with each other and then forgetting again. So let's try not to do that this time, for example. I still need a sound effect for Idiot's Corner, Keith. Is that coming along all right? Is that okay? So that's coming up later today. I'm one topic short of a picnic at the moment. There's a couple of contenders for the middle hour, but in the third hour, I think we'll return our attention to this terrible story about half of recruiters thinking that 57 is too old. Did you hear Daniel yesterday in Reigate, the plumber? 29 years old, got 8 or 9 people on his staff. He sounded like precisely the kind of fella that you would want to entrust your new boiler, the installation of your new boiler to. But he said something that haunted me a bit on the way home. He said, I only really like to hire people younger than me, because older people don't like being told what to do by someone younger. And I just thought, crikey, he's 29. He's not far off half my age. What chances would I have if I was trying to get hired in that sector? If it was dominated, if the boss class was dominated by Daniels? I do not know. But we turn our attention instead this morning to a combination of stories, all of which I think speak to some of our favourite subjects on this programme. If you don't know why I'm so fascinated by class and education, it's because of that Robert Frost poem, the one about a path not taken. Two roads, is it, or two paths diverged in the wood, and I took the one less travelled by, and that has made all the difference. Now, it's not really the point that Robert Frost was trying to convey, but what I got from that poem as a young man, as a boy indeed, was the other you, the you would be if your early opportunities had been different. I find it extraordinary how little attention we pay to this as a society, or even perhaps as a species. I mean, it makes sense because the people with the privilege also have the power. And if you've got the power and the privilege, you probably want to sustain the notion that you somehow deserve them, whether it is the caste system in the Hindu faith, or whether it is the rich man in his castle, poor man at his gate, God made them high and lowly and ordered their estate doctrine that we used to sing to the tune of all creatures great and small in my convent school in Kidderminster in the mid-1970s. You sustain the idea that society is fair, even as it perpetuates epic unfairness. So the role of privilege and power in society is to make unfairness fair. I worked bloody hard to get where I am today. Yeah, well, I know some coal miners who worked harder, and they haven't got a fraction of what you've got by way of financial security and indeed health. So it's an illustration, an example. And I think the reason why I'm fascinated by it is because I'm adopted. I think that part of the reason for my fascination with the role that privilege and power can play in your life is because I find it a little bit easier to imagine the other me than perhaps you do. I don't know. Daniel's been in touch already to say I think about this every day. I think, and it's only something that came to me quite late in life. I didn't certainly think that my adoption had anything to do with this as a younger man. But thinking about it and writing about various issues, I found myself wondering whether you become more conscious of where your life would have gone, for good or for ill. Because, of course, some adopted people have the opposite experience from me. They have a really tough time of it, and they find themselves pining almost, yearning for the path not taken. Whereas I am absolutely blooming delighted with the path taken. I won't bore you with the details, but I'm luck personified when it comes to that weird second bite of the lottery of life. Who your parents are biologically is your first ticket, but you get a second ticket if you're adopted, and that can be the jackpot. And indeed, it was for my sister and for me. So because I've got that idea somewhere deep inside me about the other me, who I would have been. And then, of course, Mum and Dad sent me to one of the best schools in the country, an enormous, I don't want to say sacrifice because that kind of flies in the face of what I'm about to talk about next, but as an enormous effort. Effort's a good word. It was an enormous effort to send me to those schools that I was sent to. And they brought me immense privilege. So I have those two enormous advantages: a secure, happy, loving home and the best education that money can buy. Right? Oddly, for amateur psychologists out there, the two men that I mentioned at the top of the show, Boris Johnson and Nigel Farage, have only one of those two things, which perhaps explains some of their demons and some of their driving forces. A profoundly secure, loving and happy home with parents who stay together. And sometimes, of course, splitting up is the right thing to do. But all the evidence shows us that that is a huge jackpot in life. And then the best education money can buy, which is a huge intellectual advantage. Some of the emotional damage it can do, not to all of us, but to some of us, remains. So there you have. David B. reminds us of the reasons why Trading Places is such an extraordinary and memorable film. There's a couple of early nods there for Groundhog Day and Trading Places, which probably would have been on the same shelf in the video store, wouldn't they? Back in the day, don't you think? Groundhog Day and Trading Places. Dan Aykroyd and Bill Murray worked a lot together as well. So yeah, okay. The sort of Saturday Night Live alumni shelf in the video store in Kidderminster could easily have had both of those on. So you've got two jackpots there. The jackpot of a loving family, a secure home, a happy childhood, and the jackpot of an exceptional education. Now, here's the weird thing. Why on earth would you want to deny anybody either of those things? When I turn my attention to private education, as we're about to do this morning on the programme, I am pretty clear that it is an unconscionable unfairness, despite having benefited from it enormously and having children who have, although they no longer do, that they have benefited from it enormously. And I'm under no illusions about the unfairness of that. And I would be happier as a citizen of this country to see that level of education offered to every child, or to see the unfairness removed. But imagine if I sat here now and said it's not fair that some children have secure homes, happy families, loving environments growing up, and parents that stay together. How mad would that sound if I took that jackpot and said to you, I think it's unfair. We should be deliberately introducing trauma into children's lives. We should be splitting up their parents. We should be making their homes less secure. We should be making their childhoods less happy. No one would argue with that. And I guess the difference is that one is emotional and one is material. So the benefit you get from the happy childhood is inside you. And the benefit you get from private education is outside you. It's about what you can accrue. It's a bit like supermarket sweep with the late Dale Winton. Private education gets you a bigger trolley, so you might be spending the same amount of time in the supermarket, but you can cram so much more into your trolley because it's twice the size of everybody else's. So private education, one analogy would be your parents buy you a much bigger trolley than everybody else. It doesn't come full, but it's a heck of a lot easier to walk out with 2 trolley loads if you've got a double-sized trolley than it is if you've only got a single-sized trolley. Some people are going to have enormous trolleys that stay more or less empty. There's no hard and fast rules, but there are generalisations, there are tides, there are movements. So I think I've worked out why I've got a problem with one jackpot and not with the other. But what I haven't got is the proper perspective of the other me. The proper perspective of where you'd be if this world was differently built. So let me throw in 2 of my favourite tropes now. The first would be John Rawls, an American philosopher from the last century, who invented something called the veil of ignorance, which is the idea that you construct a system of rules without knowing where you would sit in it. So what do we want wealth distribution to look like? How poor do we want the poorest people in society to be? And how rich do we want the richest people in society to be? Now, you and I can't answer that because we're automatically thinking of our own bank balance. But if we had a veil of ignorance pulled over our eyes, so we didn't know where we would be on that list, then we would probably all want the poorest person in society to have more than they currently have, and the richest person in society to have less than they currently have. Still have huge gap between the two, but you wouldn't have abject poverty or absurd Elon Musk style profligacy. And then the second bit, of course, is the old John Steinbeck quote about there being no such thing as poverty in Dust Bowl era America from much earlier in the last century than John Rawls. There were just temporarily frustrated millionaires. So we turn now to fee-paying schools in the United Kingdom in the 21st century. And the first thing I'll do is invent some statistics. So I think the first one is true. About 7% of people have a personal relationship with fee-paying schools. 7% of the population, 7% of children go to fee-paying schools in this country. Not all of them are going to be opposed to Labour's plans, or not all of their parents are going to be opposed to Labour's plans to increase or to introduce VAT. Because, of course, until the end of last term, I was one of them. And then you've got, what, 20%, would you say? 20%? I'm tempted to say 23% because then my sums come easier. 23 plus 7 is 30. But 20%, let's say, are somehow in that most impenetrable section of society who are in favour of inequality and unfairness, even though they're on the wrong side of it. Because like the millionaires in Dust Bowl era, the frustrated millionaires in Steinbeck's Dust Bowl era America, they think that one day they'll be on the right side of unfairness. These are the people that in many ways prop up right-wing politics around the world. It's horribly unfair. I'm being discriminated against, but A, I'm going to blame it on immigrants, and B, I might be on the right side of the unfairness one day. So let's say 20%, 25, 23, go on, I'll play my maths. 23% are in that category. That's 30. And then I would say you've got 20% of the population who are passionately and ideologically opposed to fee. You think higher? Lower than 20%? Let's not play your cards right, Eleanor, please. Can we take this seriously as a subject? Higher! Higher! Nothing in this game for two in a bed, Keith. I think 20%, I think you're wrong. I think 20% of people have got a real problem with fee-paying education for all the right reasons, but we shall see. Okay? I would be in that 20%. Something I feel very strongly about. So, you know, and that means 50% of the population couldn't give two hoots. 50% of the population couldn't care less. And when I say that figure there, 50%, I think the 20% figure is too low. I think people quite like this as a policy. And you can tell who doesn't like it by the amount of attention. I told you Nick had a caller yesterday who came on LBC and said, I can't believe that all the media is in favour of VAT being put on schools. And I thought, what the heck? Where have you been? North Korea? I said, every newspaper I open is having a fit of the vapours at the moment about people being compelled to pay a tax on their children's education akin to the tax that they currently pay on sausage rolls. Extraordinary to me to think that anyone could have spent 10 seconds with their eyes open in modern Britain and thought that the media, as a sort of general homogenous lump, was in favour of this Labour policy. Here's just one. I mean, at random, opening the Telegraph. Labour's war on private schools is being exposed as pure class hatred. Except it's not, is it? It's just an attempt to spread the jackpot out between everybody instead of confining it to 7% of the population. So I don't want the conversation about VAT specifically. I think that's over, all right? If you've got a problem with it, just cancel your Netflix subscription, eat fewer avocados for breakfast, and what's the other one? Is there another cliche in that space that you usually tell young people who can only dream of ever being able to afford a house that it's all their own fault because of their lifestyle choices? Avocado on toast, Netflix subscriptions, and value food. I don't know if you're aware of this. A Conservative politician last year discovered value ranges in supermarkets. If you can't afford the VAT on your kids' school fees, do not worry. Cancel your Netflix, eat fewer avocados, and start eating the value range from your local supermarket. You'll be fine. Or take 30p Lee's advice. Buy his cookbook and start cooking meals that only cost. So you've got absolutely nothing to worry about on that front. Good luck to you. So that's a silly conversation to have. just sort of very entitled people who don't realise how privileged they are, ringing up to complain that they're the real victims in a country where only 7% of children have parents who can afford to send them to private schools. Get a better job. There you go. Thank you, Stuart. Get a better job. I like that. I do like that. Okay, what's that? You can't afford VAT on your children's school fees? Oh, I know what. You can get a better job. Go on. Or do 2 jobs. Get 2 jobs. Get a better job. Cancel Netflix. Eat fewer avocados. Use the value range in the supermarket and get a better job. You'll be able to afford 10 more children. Send them all to Eton. So what does it look like from where you are in the 50% or the 20% or even the 23%, but not the 7%? How much damage does it really do? 0345 6060 973. Fewer holidays. Thank you, Marion. Drink less takeaway coffee. Thank you, Bryn. Yes, exactly. Quit Starbucks. There we go. So what does it do? What does it do? Fee-paying education. What difference does it make? It's 20 past 10. Keith's giving me that look. I've got at least 10 more minutes of explanation here, but I don't know that now is the time to inflict it upon you. Not least because the advertisers would be quite upset. But I want you to come at it from either good or bad. Does it do damage to society or does it actually do good? Hit the numbers now. You will get through. But if you don't, I've got 10 more minutes on this because it is probably one of the most abiding issues of my life and indeed my career, my personal life and my professional life. But I suspect other people would rather hear your voice than mine when we come back from the break. So answer this question with evidence, explanation, personal experience perhaps, but not exclusively. What damage or benefit, what harm or benefit does a society accrue or suffer as a consequence of a tiny minority of children receiving a measurably better education than the massive majority? Because and only because their parents can afford it. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. It's 10:21. 23 minutes after 10, and I'll tell you what they're scared of. I'll tell you what they're frightened of. They're frightened that their children will have to take their chances on a more level playing field with your children. So when I speak to the 93% of parents who don't send their children to private school, and you wonder what the 7% are so scared of, it's the idea that their children will have to take their chances with your children on a more level playing field. It'll still be unlevel, still be epic unfairness baked into geography, wealth, emotional health, physical health, family dynamics, security, all of those things that can give advantages and disadvantages in life. But what is everyone so cross about? What are all these columnists so upset about? What are all these gobs on sticks getting their knickers in a twist about? Because they know deep down, as I do, that I wouldn't be here now if I'd had to take my chances in an equal field. I like to think I would be, but I can't prove it. And the reason why some parents get so upset and so emotional, so angry and so bitter about it is because they don't want their children to take a chance with your children on a level playing field, on a more equal footing. So what damage from the outside does this mode of education, this almost uniquely British mode of education do? What damage does it do to the whole of society? Or, of course, what good does it do? 10:24 is the time. Dave's in Toaster in Northamptonshire. Dave, what would you like to say?
Hi there, James.
Hello.
I listen to you quite a lot, and I've always winced a bit when you've kind of talked about private schools and this sort of feeling that you have that they're so much better than state schools.
Well, shall I explain? Because you probably haven't listened enough. So when I look at things like the media, when I look at things like the judiciary, when I look at things like medicine, when I look at the armed forces, when I look at the police, when I look at anything in this country that we might loosely call a profession, and I look at the proportional representation of privately educated people versus non-privately educated people, that's where I derive my conclusion that you are more likely to end up in those jobs if you went to private school. Because that's not an opinion, Dave. That's counting.
Okay, that's fine, James. And I think that is actually it's sort of chicken and egg. I think that's a bit of a problem with the society that we've got. Because, I mean, if I can just sort of explain my situation, I went to a grammar school, which I guess in some ways it's akin to a private school. I went there and I felt a sense of privilege that I'd got to go there, and probably felt that I was a little bit better than the average common sort of man in the street. And that
Really?
sort of came back, and that kind of came back to bite me in the bum when I went into business. I actually had to deal with sort of
let me just rewind you a bit. So when you say, when I explained to you the thing you were confused about, and you understand that you were wrong to be confused, and then you say, well, that's the problem in society. That's what the whole phone-in is about, Dave. The whole phone-in is about the fact that this type of education buys you a golden ticket that propels you into places that are infinitely harder to get into if you don't have the golden ticket. So why is that a bad thing? That's really what the phone-in is. I apologise for not being clear enough during a 20-minute introduction.
No, okay. I didn't perhaps catch the beginning of it. Basically, you don't develop emotional intelligence at public schools. How do you know? And all the rest of it. Well, I'm speaking from personal experience. I got, great exam results, went to great universities and all the rest of it. Didn't have any emotional intelligence whatsoever.
Why is that? I mean, maybe it's different in Northern Ireland, but grammar school's not a public school. It's not a boarding school.
It isn't, but when you go there, you do your 11 plus, and you sort of feel I'm a little bit better because of where I went.
And why is that bad for society?
Because you kind of end up thinking you're better than other people. I mean, just if I can continue. But you are.
Story. You get your. That's the point. Society gives you gifts that you wouldn't otherwise get. So it perpetuates that notion of privilege. If you're on the right side of it, I need you to explain what on earth is wrong with that, or what damage it does to society. Chris is in Tower Hamlets. Chris, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James.
Hello, Chris.
Long time no speak.
Well, yes, but for people, because my memory is extraordinary, for people who don't know, Chris was the headmaster of a comprehensive school in Tower Hamlets. So you come to this, dare I say, with a little bit more understanding of the issues under discussion than the last lad.
Well, a little, James. Two things quite quickly. I mean, one, journalists often ask the wrong question. I'm not suggesting you're one of them. They often want to know where cabinet ministers, senior politicians, government ministers went to school themselves.
Yes.
I'm much more interested in where they send their own children.
Yes.
Have they got skin in the game, as you always say?
Because, David Cameron didn't send his oldest son to Eton, but they all went to private school. Diane Abbott got a lot of jip for sending her children to private school. So there is something quite tricky, isn't there, about I remember being in a politics class with a lad whose legal guardian, because he'd lost his parents, his legal guardian was Shirley Williams, who had been the education secretary under Labour. And this was at Ampleforth. And even then I remember thinking, this is a bit rum, isn't it? If you're in charge of everybody else's education, should you really be able to opt out of it?
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. I mean, of course it's difficult because we're talking about people and their own children. But I think it's really important because if people feel that they're protected in some way themselves, or their children are protected in some way themselves from the reality that the majority are having to face, they're less concerned to do something about it. I mean, the fact that most of the current cabinet, went to state schools is,
yes,
to my way of thinking, a really good thing, a good omen, because they've got skin in the game.
What do you think it will deliver? Or what parts might it reach that couldn't be reached by a cabinet of... And the worst thing about the last few cabinets before this one was it didn't just contain sort of toffs and pseudo-toffs. It also contained capped offers and forelock tuggers, like sort of Nadine Dorries and Duncan Smith and the rest of them. So when you've got better representation in cabinet, how might that improve policy making or politics?
Well, it's just that, sheer understanding. If your children are experiencing the system themselves, they're just going to have a greater understanding. I mean, as you know, I was a head teacher in Tower Hamlets, but prior to that, I was deputy head of a school in Camden where one young Ed Miliband was one of my students.
Yes.
Ed and David, who went on to be Foreign Secretary, Ed to lead the Labour Party, both went to a neighbourhood comprehensive school. They developed, I think, a genuine understanding of how most people in this country live their lives.
So talk to me then about the I mean, bearing in mind that this is an entirely made-up figure, the 23% of people who don't, and let's say for the sake of argument, that can't afford to send their children to private school, but are susceptible to the right-wing rabble-rousing on this issue in thinking that there is something wrong in trying to level a playing field that they're at the wrong end of. What's going on there, do you think?
I mean, I guess the first thing I want to say, I said my second point, James, was that it's really important to understand what people are actually buying with private education,
yes.
Because there's a serious misunderstanding. I mean, look at the research by Bristol University or Higher Education Funding Council, which shows quite clearly that quite often, regularly, in fact, school students who are state educated outperform privately educated students at university.
Yes.
They get better degrees. It doesn't mean,
but they don't get better
jobs. No, exactly, because it's not about the quality of your exam grades or your degree grades. It's who you know and who you're in contact with.
And people don't. I think unless you live in that world, you have no idea how extraordinary it is. In fact, you can probably distill it down. My mate Andy, who I talk about a lot, he's no longer with us. He was brilliant at this. He went to Alder Hill Comprehensive in Rochdale, but he ended up knocking around in the kind of circles where people routinely ask you what school you went to, as if someone asked me what school I went to, I'd say what school I went to. Someone reels off half a dozen names, looking for connections, looking for ways that we would know each other. And he used to love what happened to people's faces when he told them where he went. But it proves a powerful point about our society, and there it is. So it's not a meritocracy. That's the first thing that you would say, isn't it? Is that it is the opposite of a meritocracy, populated entirely by people insisting that it is a meritocracy. That's why, when you hear them on other phone-in shows, and maybe still on this one, although probably not today because we're approaching it in a slightly different way, they insist that they work hard, they insist that they make sacrifices, they insist that they deserve an advantage that is by definition unfair. But again, it's the 23% who are on their side, even though they're on the wrong side of the inequality, that are most fascinating to me. And listen, I made up the figure of 23%. Eleanor thinks it's lower. I think it's probably higher. But it's definitely 1032. And Thomas Watts is here with your headlines. I wonder sometimes whether my brain gets a bit bent by doing this job. So am I giving too much time and space to the people who insist it's not unfair? I mean, those are the calls over the years that I found the most engaging and enraging, when it was often mums more than dads, actually. And you'd say it's not unfair. And you go, well, of course it's unfair. Why do you think we're paying if it's not to get something that other people can't afford? So maybe those numbers need slightly rejigging. But how would you explain to a lovely person who does genuinely go without the holidays or the car that they might otherwise have had, prioritises education over other things, which is a wonderful thing to do. If every parent prioritised their child's education, the world would be a much happier place and the country would be a much more productive place. But they just reject out of hand that private schools are bad for society. They might even know that they're unfair and they might know that they're good for their kid. But how can they be bad for society when 20 prime ministers went to Eton? That's a brilliant question, isn't it? How can they be bad for society when 20 prime ministers went to Eton? Because the fact that 20 prime ministers went to Eton is absolutely proof that we don't live in a meritocracy. But you could equally argue that, well, that proves that you need schools like this in order to prepare people to be prime minister. I genuinely see both sides of this. But I know what side I'm on. Jane's in Redbridge. Jane, what would you like to say?
Hello. I've never called in before, so this is weird.
Well, there's a first time for everything, Jane. Welcome aboard.
Thank you. I went to a private school and I sent my kids to a private school, but I entirely agree with you that they're bad for society, so yes. I am therefore a hypocrite. And my logic for that is because they advantaged my kids. I sent them there, and
I would even defend you. I'd defend you from the accusation of hypocrisy because they exist. So you not sending your children to private school would not bring about a world in which they don't exist. So I don't even think it is hypocritical. But what I do want to know is, go on. Sorry.
I have friends who would argue that if you believe that and that's your principle, then you should send your kids to the perfectly good state schools that are in my area. There's lots of them, and I could have done that.
Yes.
And A, they're perfectly good, and B, if privileged people send their kids to those schools, then that will have a positive impact on those schools. But
Fingers crossed.
Didn't do that. Yeah, and I didn't do that, and therefore I'm a hypocrite. But as my mum said when she sent me to a private school, she's a lifelong Labour voter, why should my kids suffer for my principles? Which is an awful way of putting it. But, I didn't particularly want them to be part of that social experiment. I would love everyone to have those same privileges, but right now they don't.
So what harm do you think it does to society in general to have this cohort of privilege?
Well, I think the difficulty is the 7% are getting more life chances than the 93%. I also worked for an independent school, so
You're almost in Ray Liotta territory here.
Yeah, so I understand the privileges it affords that tiny minority, and I don't think it's to do with the quality of the teaching necessarily. It's the social advantages. My son was interested in engineering, and the family we know through school, the dad is a chartered engineer and a King's Counsel and an IG barrister, so he could have a chat with him.
Yes.
And, lots of other kids wouldn't know that man and couldn't have a chat with him.
And that is essentially the kind of golden ticket territory, isn't it? So Chris was right. It doesn't mean they'll get better degrees, but it does mean that when they come towards the end of their degree, there'll be people they can call. And that's not fair, is it? But you'd be mad to deny your own child that opportunity while other people were still buying it for their children, in my view. I mean, I appreciate your friends.
Yes, that's
pleading hypocrisy, but we would have to sit there watching Jacob Rees-Mogg's children fly past ours because he'd bought them advantages that we could have bought for our children but elected not to. I find that almost incomprehensible. My dad would come back and haunt me, Jane, if I had done that.
As would mine.
So it's there, but it is.
But it still feels hypocritical.
Yeah, fair enough. I guess it is hypocritical. Do as I say, not as I do. But what I want to happen and what you want to happen is, well, do you want to? I mean, would you approve of the abolition? I presume you approve of the VAT, do you?
I do approve of the VAT, but I don't necessarily approve of the way it's being introduced. Having worked in an independent school, I know that actually schools work on quite a long financial cycle.
Yes.
And schools generally work on quite a long cycle, necessarily the academic year and all of that. So I think people need a whole academic year to plan in order to get to where they're going to go if they can't sustain staying at an independent school.
No.
I, by the way, don't think very many will actually have to switch.
Well, in which case it ceases to be ideological, doesn't it? And just becomes a fundraising exercise. So it ceases to be political and becomes fiscal, which, it's still a rationale for doing it if they do raise a lot of money. I agree with you. I don't think there'll be a great exodus from the schools, but that means that it won't have delivered better equality, which is not really what they're saying they're aiming to do. It's just what, the left traditionally as opposed to the unearned privilege. But on this occasion, it might just be a fundraising exercise. Although, as Jane says, with quite a few things that they've introduced from what appear to be points of principle, the practicalities don't seem to have been considered enough. Thank you, Jane. From Jane to Joanne in Fulham. Joanne, what would you like to say?
Oh, hello. Yes, good morning. Thanks for having me on.
You're very welcome.
I have a very specific case, actually. My daughter went to state primary school, and she was actually spotted by a head teacher as a very, clever, bright, intelligent girl with a lot to offer, and she could be pushed further. So the head of this school has given her an opportunity to go and win a scholarship at a private school to study in her own time for 1 year.
Yes.
With that private school. And that's what the private schools do. They contacted the state schools around to try and get the girls or boys that could be elevated, with their skills, with their studying. She won this scholarship for a year with a top private school in her own time. She studied for 1 year, and it was in order for her to try and pass the entrance exam of a private school. And
so not only are they selling privilege to the highest bidders, they're also harvesting the cream of the cream of pupils who can't afford it in your community.
Yes, they're doing it for people that might not have an opportunity. So they're trying to branch out to people that are bright enough that can push themselves and elevate themselves, but we will have to apply for a bursary.
Well, I hope you get it.
In my case, it was very unfortunate.
Oh, I'm sorry.
She passed the entrance exam. She did ever so well. However, I couldn't, my salary was slightly above the threshold of getting a bursary.
Right.
So I was offered a place, but I couldn't afford it.
So
and I was horrified because we got offered a very, very bad state school, actually. Not even a normal one, but a very bad state school. So I was so upset for her that she sacrificed so much for 1 year and she had so much going for her, and given this opportunity, it was down the drain. So I was so upset for her.
I bet you were.
In the end,
Go on.
actually, I had great fortune that we landed on. My company have decided to pay and offered to pay for her entire private school education.
That's
so
wonderful.
She now has started secondary school, private school. But my point is to this, you know, she would never, ever otherwise have this opportunity. And it's not an opportunity that she's better than someone else.
It is.
It's knowing that she has skill
it totally
she has
is.
no limits.
But she's a very rare example of someone who will benefit from private education, because she's literally been harvested because of her intelligence. The massive majority of her classmates are only there because their parents are richer than you.
Yes. And actually, my point that I sent her there, I actually in the end got offered a very good state school, and I had to choose between a very good state school and the private school, and I didn't know what to do. And I was advised against going to private school. My friends have told me it's not a great move for you going forward. However, for me, I knew she would have... for me, it's not about society that she'll come out better off societal with her contacts and her position in life. It was actually knowing that she can have the knowledge and the skills that she would never otherwise have.
It's the same thing, really, isn't it? I mean, the knowledge and the skills is what advances her into society. Oh, you mean education for education's sake?
Yes, education. That's what I mean, for education and skills, not for her society position in life.
And I think we're on very similar pages with regards to the sort of the pragmatics of access. But what's your attitude on the unfairness of it all? How fair is it that your daughter get this opportunity and all of your friends' children, or certainly the friends that were discouraging you from sending her, they simply don't get close to it? They don't get close to the cherry, let alone get a bite of it.
I totally believe in fairness, and I think everyone should have a fair shot. But I guess... But
as long as unfairness exists, we want to be on the right side of it.
Yes, but for example, my daughter was prepared to put in the hard work.
Lots of children are prepared to put in the hard work, and they'll never get anywhere near a private school. This is what we do, we try and convince ourselves that we're not part of an epically unfair system, but we are, even if you're benefiting from what sounds like an extraordinary generous employer.
Yes,
that's another advantage. So there's another advantage that's been denied to all of your colleagues.
I don't know. Actually, some other colleagues may have been offered the same, and they have been offered the same. So I'm not just an individual, my own there. But
everyone wants to know where you work now. But I won't embarrass you by asking. But there it is. I mean, that to me, as a social engineer, that's a horrible story. The idea that not only are you giving unearned advantage to the children of wealthy parents, but you're going into the local state schools and creaming all the most talented kids off the top, to get your grade averages up so that the children of the aristocracy don't drag everything down to the lowest possible level, and B, the school that you have taken that child out of suffers accordingly because they don't have the high achiever that they otherwise would have had. So that's the social engineering speaking, the dad speaking, the parent speaking. Absolutely. Absolutely. Get in there. Thank God your employer stepped up to the plate in the way that they did. And you'd be absolutely bonkers not to take advantage of the opportunity being offered to you. But it's a hideously unfair opportunity. And that's why the politics of it remains so interesting. It's 10:47. 10:50 is the time. So loath though I am to give him any more attention. If you're looking at the damage that the kind of education I had can do to a society, it's a combination of who gets to rise to the top and who and what they do when they get there. So that would involve Boris Johnson finally telling the truth about his Brexit motivations.
Well, let's talk about Brexit. Is, as you say, a defining part of your legacy. It was chaos afterwards, as you acknowledge in your book. And you blame a lot of people for that. You blame David Cameron, you blame Theresa May later, you blame the EU. The one person you don't blame is you, and people will find that amazing. You told us that we should do this, and you hadn't devoted any serious thought to what came next.
Come on. So I wanted to win an argument, and I believed in freedom, and I believed that our country had a great, great future.
But you were the leader. You were leading us into this.
What we expected, and what I think everybody expected, was that the Cameron government having called a referendum a yes/no choice for the people, leave remain choice for the people, would bring forward a white paper.
Why? He didn't believe it. What made you possibly think that would be the outcome?
Because every other European leader, when they hold referendums, decides, once the people have voted, decides what to do and stays in office. So it's not normal for the Prime Minister, having asked for a referendum vote, suddenly to evacuate the stage.
So there it is. You've heard me posit that theory on the programme many, many times. Indeed, it's in my book, my last book. But the idea that he's so unself-aware that he'll actually just say it casually and blithely in the middle of an interview. I was all about winning an argument, couldn't give a fig about the country, couldn't care less, thought David Cameron would sort everything out. I just wanted to win an argument, do a lap of honour, have a little boast at the next Eton Old Boys reunion. Absolutely extraordinary that you could have such contempt for your country. Such contempt for your countrymen and women, that you would enter into an exercise of almost immeasurable national change. Let's not even say national harm. Let's pretend it could have gone well for the sake of argument, given that this character likes arguments so much. Let's pretend it could have gone well. But you would enter into it solely for the vanity-sating purpose of, quotes, winning an argument, end quotes, with somebody you went to school with. And you wonder why I'm doing a phone-in today about the damage that kind of education can do to an entire country. But why is it so bad? There are only a finite number of jobs, like High Court judge or radio host. There is only so why does it matter that you're much more likely to land a job like that if you went to a private school? Why does it matter? There's a finite number of jobs. It's not like you're going to suddenly create 100 more High Court judges. Here's one possible answer to that. Imagine if High Court judges usually used as an exemplar of aloofness and out of touchness. You, depending on where you are in history, you'd have what is the Beatles or something like that. The idea that they have. What if their children played with everybody else's children? What if they all went to the same school? And then the High Court judge would realise he'd watch his children playing with kids from a background that he considers to be, or she considers to be inferior, or considers to be just different, alien. And then you see, at 6 years old, 7 years old, that lad over there is cleverer than my kid. And yet that lad's life opportunities are minimal compared to my kids. How can that possibly be right? And then that kid might end up in the dock 20 years later. Because he's had no experience of it, because his children have had no experience of it. They've got no idea of how similar we all are. And so it would drive a coach and horses through the sort of Anglo-Saxon equivalent of the Hindu caste system, the idea that we're born at different stations in society. Private education enforces that, and it allows some people, like my parents, the opportunity to fire their children up a couple of rungs. But it never, ever, ever sounds fair. Leroy's in Nottingham. Leroy, what would you like to say?
Well, James, thank you for making me even feel more guilty.
Why, what have you done? What have you done?
I'm facing the haunted dilemma. So my child's in year 5, and I'm deciding whether to send them to a private school or grammar school. And I agree with you in relation to how it affects children in comprehensive schools. I am a child of a comprehensive school. And yet I am 60-40 going to send him to...
Why have you got a problem with that?
Because, I went to a comprehensive school.
Yeah,
I know right there.
But you know the advantages that you would accrue for your boy. You clearly, as a dad, are capable of ensuring that he keeps his feet on the ground in other ways, because the fact that you're even having this conversation proves that you're aware of the nuances and the complexities of the conversation. But the alternative is to sit in the stands and watch other people's children dance around all the glittering prizes.
And the problem is, it basically contravenes with my beliefs.
Does it?
So, because I'll be honest, I'm a Labour supporter. I would describe myself as not quite left, not extreme left, but sort of more than sort of left of centre. I saw my son struggle during the lockdown, and he was struggling, and it's fun to say this. In the end, I decided to put my hand in my pocket and give him private lessons.
Yeah. Why does this bother you? Why do you think this? Because I mean, leftishness is opposition to unearned, undeserved, shall we say? Because it's earned. In your case, you've earned it, and you get to choose your money on whatever you want to spend it on. And you've chosen to spend it on tuition for your child. So, opposition to unfair advantage, to me, is not the same as having to opt out of advantages that your society offers. You can agitate to remove them. You can agitate to shrink the size of the constituency that enjoys the privilege. But I don't know whether or not what you describe sounds a bit like cutting your nose off to spite your face. I don't know why you're beating yourself up about it so much.
Because, James, I've worked with young offenders. Yeah. And I remember one of my first jobs in sort of working with people involved in the police. Yeah. I met an 18-year-old, and I appreciate during my time at school there were kids who messed about and so forth. But sure. I was absolutely thrown when this child told me, as an adult, he could not read. It just knocked me for six. And I've, over the years, regularly had contact with young people who are having problems in education in one form or another. I currently work with children with autism, and obviously those issues are great to them. Some of them go to school.
Of course.
And so in my daily life, I see young people struggling in their learning. And we all know, basically, that school is one of those protective factors which also helps in relation to mental health, of course, and things like that. And therefore, and that's my guilt. So, yeah,
well, I'm being a bit obtuse, I think. Maybe I'm being a bit self-serving here, because I don't feel what you describe, and maybe I'm beginning to fear my Catholicism is kicking in, and I'm wondering why I don't feel guilty, and perhaps I should. Because how does you not sending your boy to the school that you want to send him to help the next generation of kids who reach 18 unable to read?
I suppose the only way I can probably get around it is when they do slap on that 20% is to pay it. And that might assuage my guilt somewhat.
But you haven't answered my question. Why would not sending him there, how would that help the lads that you're talking about, the children that you're talking about? The ones denied, the ones at the other extreme, the ones denied all advantages.
It won't do, and that's why I will continue to feel guilty. Even though
I feel like a father confessor now. I want you to put the phone down, feeling not guilty anymore. I want to give you 10 Hail Marys and an Our Father or something like that. So I don't know why you're feeling guilty, and I suspect you should feel less guilty, and maybe I should feel a bit more guilty, albeit that it's in the rearview mirror for me now. Jane described the hypocrisy attached to it, but I don't agree with that. I don't think it's hypocritical to take advantage of something that is legal and exists, even while you think that it shouldn't.
And
you support the attempts to shrink the numbers. So introduce VAT, stick another tax on it, do something else, bring it down to like 0.5% of the population. The children of oligarchs are the only ones that go to private schools, and then you wipe out all of the other benefits that we've been talking about, the old school tie, the rest of it. I don't know.
It just shouldn't exist, James.
No.
And I know I'm taking advantage of it, and I have the money to take advantage of it. But it shouldn't exist. And it should be, as a nation, if we're all talking about sort of Great Britain and wanting to be one greatness, we should all be making sure all our children succeed, not just the ones who can afford it.
Yeah. Well, again, it's a reason why you should feel less guilty than everybody else. You send your lad to the school and you carry on doing the work that you do with the children that are going to benefit enormously from having someone as caring and as thoughtful and as compassionate in their lives as you clearly are. But I guess that's the sophistry in me. That's the public school debating society kicking in and trying to sort of put 2 and 2 together and come up with 5. I wish you well, though. Be kind to yourself, mate. Seriously, you're doing a good thing for your boy. Don't ever forget that. Even as you deal with the guilt or the fears of hypocrisy, you are doing a good thing for your boy for the best reasons. My dad taught me that. 4 minutes after 11, private healthcare and even landlordism, you're suggesting, falls into similar philosophical territory. Andy says it's the same argument with private healthcare, James. I believe passionately in the NHS, but I am guilty about using private healthcare. Ben says, surely this is the equivalent of saying, well, if I didn't drive the gas guzzler car, someone else will. No, because you're not simultaneously calling for the abolition of gas guzzler cars. And also, Well, I know, actually. The environmental damage could be comparable to the social damage, couldn't it? And then you've got landlordism, or buy-to-let landlordism, where you are depriving people who would otherwise be able to buy a home of being able to buy a home because they're buying a home, but for you. There's so many areas where the same kind of philosophical impulses kick in, and they are the areas that I historically most enjoy talking about. But we're going to talk about something completely different now. Were you listening yesterday? What? Well, I'm going to need a letter off your mum by the end of morning break, in that case. How dare? What were you doing instead? How could you not have been listening yesterday? What was the phoning we were having? What was it? Oh, this is one that I feel a little bit icky about, but we're going to be having it again as the months pass. This notion that Generation Z or Generation Z, we should probably come to a consensus agreement on what we're going to actually call you, have a relationship with work that is markedly and negatively different from the relationships that all previous generations have, including the one that immediately preceded them, which I think is the millennial generation. And I find it a really uncomfortable conversation. I sometimes think we should have sort of loyalty cards on the programme for people who can remember things that happened ages ago when the size of the audience listening to the programme was a fraction of what it is now. But I took a call. Do you know, what does your memory do at times like this? Because I know how long ago it was, roughly, by the fact that I was facing the other way in a room. And that means it was before our last massive studio refurbishment, which means it was over 10 years ago. And I because my memory of the call has got some geography in it. I know what way I was facing. And that means that it was over 10 years ago. And we were having a similar conversation, although I think it was skewed in a slightly different way. It wasn't a generational issue. It was about a lack of effort being put into things. And I took a call from a young woman who was absolutely distraught at the way we were portraying her. And she went into some detail about the efforts that she'd made to... it was graduates not finding work in the chosen field or something. I forget the precise details. But I'm haunted by that. There's a few things that have happened over the years that haunt me. There was the NHS phone-in we had, I think, about sepsis. And we did it in a very responsible way. And it was another one of those moments where I found myself envying the people who can do this for a living without giving a fig about anybody, having a sort of Boris Johnson approach to broadcasting and not really caring about any issues or individuals, just sort of seeing it all as a great exercise in ego inflation and financial advancement. But I read an email from a lady who was due to go into hospital, and we'd scared her. She was already nervous about going into hospital. And the conversation we had about sepsis, which was entirely evidence-based and highly responsible, had really upset her. So now whenever we turn our attention to the state of the NHS, I've got her words in the back of my mind somewhere, just as I've got that young woman who felt that we were personally pillorying her, despite the amazing efforts she'd put into finding a job. That's why I don't like doing the young people these days. If it was Poppy from Reading, crikey, Paul wins a prize for that in 2012. I bet you've Googled something there, haven't you, Paul? There's no earthly way you've just pulled that out of your memory banks, but well done. And another one, which I think appeared in my second book, in How Not to Be Wrong, which was when I used to be quite rude about people who were excessively indulgent of their pets. And I used to point out that, you know, if you got locked in a room together and you died, your pet would probably eat you. And I took a message off someone. I used to do it in a kind of performatively provocative way, you know, like being deliberately obnoxious in order to get a reaction out of you. It's a bit of a traditional territory for phone-in hosts, but I don't enjoy it or visit it anymore. I was even worse on obesity. But I took a message off someone who told me that his wife had died 6 months previously, and if it hadn't been for his 2 dogs, he doesn't think he'd have made it. And from that day to this, I've never gone in as hard and as performatively obnoxiously on people who love their pets more than perhaps they love their partner. I've never gone in the same way that I did previously, because that man haunts me. His thoughts haunt me. That lady being frightened as a consequence, more frightened than she already was as a consequence of going into hospital. She haunts me a bit. And Poppy and Reading. The idea that when we talk about young people not really pulling their weight, we are potentially insulting them. But we did the conversation yesterday The reason I've gone off on that 10-minute tangent was because a chap called Dan rang in from Reigate, a plumber. There's no use at all on the state of my incinerator, which is a waste disposal unit in your sink. A few people are a little bit confused. It's a great pun, right? Incinerator. Except it doesn't actually burn anything. But it's a waste disposal unit in my sink, and mine's gone up the Swanee. I don't know how to fix it. And he rang in. He was 29 years old, and he was indeed contributing to the conversation about young people having a strange relationship with work, with the idea of work, with the notions of responsibility. I told you about a mate of mine who was interviewing someone for a job, and she said, I will need some days off at very short notice. And he said, oh, really? Why? Thinking it must be a medical thing. And she said, well, my neighbours have just got a kitten, and I will have to look after it sometimes. My poor mate just didn't know where to put it. It's still funny, that, right? It's 24 hours old now. You heard that this time yesterday. So Dan rang in, 8 or 9 people on the staff, and the problems of hiring new people exacerbated by the relationship that younger people have with work. But he said something that, this happens to me sometimes. He said something that only slapped me round the back of the head after I'd left the studio when I'd finished work for the day. It's a 29-year-old saying, I don't really like to hire older people because they don't like being told what to do by somebody younger. And I thought, wow, that's some cut-off point. I imagine he'd be fine with a 35-year-old, someone that might look right. So what's that? 25 to 35, you might all look vaguely similar. 30 to 40, 30 to 35. But there obviously comes a point where the age difference between employer and employee has become a problem for both the employer and the employee. And so that was bubbling away in the back of my brain yesterday when I turned the page of my newspaper this morning and read that almost half of recruiters think that 57 is too old. Now, I've wondered for some time whether in the interests of longevity, professional longevity, I should stop mentioning my age on air. Does it alienate younger listeners? We've got extraordinary demographics on this programme, unique, I think, in British radio for the younger demographics listening to speech radio. But if I keep mentioning that I'm, would it actually would you start thinking, well, I don't know what. I like to think that young people come in to the programme because they see me as a sort of wise old owl, almost like a father figure, a sort of paternal. No, not a grandfather, Keith, a father figure, or an older brother, actually, like a sort of big brother type of character, dispensing sage advice and life experience. I like to think that, but there comes a point where if you're tuning in at 25, you think, what's this fella got to say that I'm going to be interested in? He hasn't got a clue. He doesn't know whether he's come, which is why I would then throw open the phone lines to you for you to educate me and illuminate me. But 57 stopped me in my tracks. Half of recruiters saying that 57 is too old. 750 HR departments, 4,000 workers, millions of older people risk being overlooked for jobs because of entrenched ageism. And this is even as companies continue to face a significant shortage of skilled workers. Oh, thank you, Brian. Yeah, Brian says, you like my mate's cool dad. That's what I'm going for. I'm your mate's cool dad. That's the role I'm going for as an older statesman now of British radio. The reason I mention my age is stop laughing at me. This is what people. Brian is real. He's real. He thinks I'm like his mate's cool dad. You don't know how lucky you are getting to work with me every day. The reason I mention my age still on the radio is because when I started, I was very young for this line of work. I was only 31 or 32, and normally a radio phone-in host is about 106. They're older than Methuselah. So that's why I did it. But I've been doing it for 20 years now, and I'm beginning to think: is it time to stop? You know, is it time to kind of stop revealing that I'm old because people might think they shouldn't be listening older? And then, of course, there's people 20 years older than me that think I'm still a spring chicken and they can't believe I'm talking about age from the angle that I'm talking about it. But I'm 5 years away from being too old for half of the recruiters in the country. And I don't understand why. And you know what I do when I don't understand something? Yeah, I ask you. Oh, come on, keep up at the back. And I don't understand why. So I want the why of it and I want the what of it. I want the why of it. Why does this? Because it doesn't really make sense. At 57, you've got at least another 10 years in the workplace, quite probably. It's not as if you're going to hang up your headphones 10 minutes from now or knock it on the head by tea time, you are, by definition, to tie it in with yesterday's conversation, going to have a much better established relationship with work than some of the younger generation reportedly do. I highly doubt that a 57-year-old in pursuit of a new position is going to say that I need to have some time off sometimes at very short notice because my neighbours have just got a new kitten and I may be required to look after it. Or, same bloke, filling the same position, had the young woman who said to him that she needs to know what the penalty arrangement is for punctuality. And he said, well, why? She goes, because I imagine I'm going to be late a lot. And he goes, well, why don't you just not be late a lot, and then you won't be affected by the penalties? And she's like, no, I mean, I find it hard getting out of bed in the mornings, and travel's a nightmare. And the later I leave, the harder it is to get. Well, leave early. No, I can't. Could you just tell me, please, what the punishments are? So he tells her, it's 3 strikes and you're out during your probation period, unless you've got a good reason for being late. And she says, well, I don't think I can take this job then. That's not going to happen with a 57-year-old, is it? Or even a 58-year-old. You're not going to have somebody saying, I can't really take this job because I need to be late a lot, or I need days off at very short notice for no really very good reason. Or was it the caller yesterday who said she went on holiday and then got a text saying, can I stay for a bit longer? That's not going to happen, is it, if you've got a 58-year-old applying for a job or in their first 3-month period of probation? So I don't think this is a silly question. If it is, we'll park it and move on to the second bit of this hour. But why? Is it just because what were you like when you were 30? There it is. So I've got a 30-year-old colleague. How old am I to you? If you were interviewing me for a job, if I walked into the room, would you now think, he's a bit too old? Would you? Even in my shacket with my bracelets. Would you? Is that what it is? So if you've got a 35, 40-year-old hiring, that's why. I wonder how this breaks down. I don't think the survey has broken it down into the age of the person answering the question. 57 is too old, says a 30-year-old. 57 is too old, says a 56-year-old. Highly, highly unlikely. Unless I'm wrong. I'm often wrong. 0345 6060973. Why? Why do half of recruiters think that 57 is too old? I'll take any answer you've got on that. And then comes the next bit, which is the first time it happened to you. The first time, because that must be a moment, right? That must be a moment when you realise that someone has just discriminated against you, and we're talking about the workplace, not necessarily finding a new job. It could be promotion. We're not talking about your love life. All right, we'll do that on another occasion when you realise that you're over the hill, as it were. But in a professional environment, particularly as someone, I wasn't expecting that. I just thought of my late father, and when he, post-redundancy, pre-retirement, had a couple of experiences that should not have happened. And the people that elected not to give him a job, I mean, they were so foolish. I'm not just being loyal to my dad. He'd have done such an amazing job for them. There was a newspaper he could have edited, and he'd done such an amazing job for them, but they even told him that they thought he was just a tiny bit too old for it. And he'd man alive. And that moment when you've realised for the very first time that your age is now a factor. So we might all have been through the opposite, or you haven't got enough experience, or you're still a bit too young, or come back in a couple of years. But that is fine, because you can come back in a couple of years. When you're at the other end, and you know, because they say so, or you think because of the way the cookie is crumbling, that they are judging you because of your age. They're saying to you, no, you're a bit odd, you're a bit too, I've got a job, you could do a great job, but I'm not going to give it to you because you're 57 or you're 60. What's that like? What's that moment like? So the why of it and the what of it. Why does this happen? 0345 6060973. And what is it like to know? Because they might say you're overqualified, but you know that's not it. What's it like to know that you are dealing with one of the 50% of all recruiters who think that 57 is too old, and you suddenly realise it's you? Hit the numbers now, you will get through. 0345 6060973. It's 20 past 11. It's 22 minutes after 11. I'm the same, actually. Chantal. Whenever I say what's it like, I hear it in the voice from my old school friend. I haven't told that story for a while. It's probably due a run out. And speaking of regular features on the programme, I've got a new one for you, but it needs a name. And the likelihood of us getting a flipping sound effect is probably zero, given the success I've had in previous attempts to inject a little bit of pizzazz into proceedings. But it's quite an important new feature, actually. And it's... Well, I should shut up for a while, shouldn't I? Take some calls. All right, Jonathan's in Bournemouth. Jonathan, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, James.
Hello.
I think I'm going through what you described just now. I think I'm suffering from being on the wrong end of this for the first time as someone looking for work.
I'm sorry to hear that. What's going on? Tell me more.
I'm 46.
Ooh.
I've had...
You're not a Chippendale, are you? Because there will be some jobs where age is going to be more of a factor than in others.
No. I've had a really good career in user experience, digital user experience.
Okay.
Brilliant CV. Anytime I've been looking for work before, my CV would get me an interview straight away.
Yeah.
But I've been looking since February. I don't understand what else it can be. I think it's because I've got 25 years experience. People are seeing that as a negative. I don't know.
No, I don't either. And you're not getting interviewed either. You're just...
No, I'm not even getting... Yeah.
And previously it's been a fairly... I mean, is the sector struggling? I don't imagine that sector is struggling as much as others, is it?
I don't think so.
So for people who don't know, you would be in charge of making a website or an app better. I would be coming on it as a user, and I'd be thinking, why can't I find anyone? Why can't I get hold of it? Why can't I do it? And then you just make it easier for me to use. So everyone needs that at the moment.
That's right.
And how does it make you feel?
Really worried, because I'm not even on the housing ladder yet. So if I'm going to get a mortgage, I've got to work for 25 years yet, and I already feel like nobody wants me.
So 60, 71, yeah. And that is a reasonable working stretch, isn't it? A reasonable span.
Yeah.
Have you spoken to anyone in the same industry? Have you spoken to anyone about what might be going on? And because I imagine for the first couple of weeks, you didn't feel... So you literally, I almost feel guilty for doing this on the radio today, because this is almost in the sweet spot for you of when you're beginning to think that there might be something bigger going on than just, teething troubles or seasonal issues.
Yeah. I've had a word with a couple of people, and they were surprised, I think, more than anything, that I wasn't getting any response.
Are you expecting higher pay than somebody younger would for doing a similar job?
No.
Or you're just sending off your CV for existing vacancies?
I'm sending off for existing vacancies. They list the salary. I'm obviously flexible at the moment, having no income. But, yeah.
And you've had no feedback, no indication of what it might be?
No, it always just says the skills don't match what we're looking for, even though we've got everything kind of on the job description ticked off.
And we've got no way of knowing, have we, whether or not it is the fact that you're 46, which is 11 years younger than the threshold that recruiters are citing, or whether it's just bad luck or dumb luck, or there's something else going on.
I do wonder if they see 25 years experience and think, his digital's a fast-moving environment, his experience is old, even though I've shown change and innovation throughout that time. Yeah,
so it wouldn't be that it would be a number on your CV, but not necessarily that number, not the date of birth. I mean, what are you going to do? Do you know?
I've got no idea. I'm just still applying for as many things as I can.
Listen, stay safe and good luck. And you can't doctor it, can you? You can't claim you've got less experience than you really have.
Yeah.
Stick in something about the most recent things you've done. I'm teaching you how to suck eggs just to show that you're up to date with all the latest developments. And how does anyone know? How does anyone listening know? How do I know? How do you know for sure that it's your age or the length of your career that is the problem? I don't know how anyone can answer that question. It's that suspicion just creeping in. I feel bad now for introducing it. I don't think I introduced it. I think it was there already. But what do you do? And that's 46. So imagine how you feel if you're 56 or 66. Looking at a country where vacancies are enormous. How much of this workforce we keep reading about is not there through choice? They're there because people aren't taking a chance on them, or people aren't extending, because the recruiting person they encounter has got this idea that 57 is too old. Jonathan, take care, mate. Chloe's in Richmond. Chloe, what would you like to say?
Hello, James. I heard that last and there was a lot that resonated with me. How do I feel at the moment? Scared. I'm 60. I have enormous experience, a lot to contribute. Have, like the last guy said, throughout my career, adopted change, managed change, introduced change, invented new things. And I'm being told now I'm too old. They don't say that because they can't, because on the bottom of every job spec
it's illegal, I think.
We're a equal opportunities employer, regardless of race discrimination. The disclaimer they put on everything. They say overqualified. They say not the right skills. They say this. They say that. So I'm 60. The law tells me I've got 7 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't have a great pension. I have a house with, considerable mortgage still on it. I had savings, which, I'm not entitled to any benefits right now, so I'm dwindling the savings. And when those go, the only option is I've got to take a chunk out of my little pension pot, which then dwindles that for my future. And then when I've got rid of that,
so this is another example of the social contract.
Really old then. I'm really, really old then. And then, so what do I do? I've got a house, right? I sell the house, but then where do I go? What do I do then? Right? And I don't have kids. I'm not married.
Yeah.
I don't have much in the way of family.
So it's all on you.
And the narrative at the moment is so divided. I get it. I've trained young people. I love young people, and define young. Yeah. Enormous energy is brought into companies when you have a mix of ages. And there's this narrative that it's a hard time for the younger generation, and I get it, and I believe it, and I agree with it. But then they have the whole debate about, the privileged older generation, they've had it good. They've never had it so good.
To be fair,
I'm trapped in the middle.
No, I know you are. And just to be fair, the same research shows that nearly half of under 35 said that they've been discriminated against, or they think they have.
I get it.
They're asked about their family plans. So where do you derive your confidence? Seems like the wrong word. How do you know that it's your age that they've got a problem with?
Technology is one thing that they don't, which is absolutely ridiculous, because I was when I was a mere 28.
But what do they say? Do they say
to have a computer on my desk in the company I work for? Yeah. I've been an early adopter of technology. I have trained, I don't know how many graduate trainees.
But do they say they don't think you'll be able to deal with the technology? Do they say that out loud? Right. Yeah. And then you can't win that. You can't prove it, can you? You just say, of course.
Well, all I can say is, I have trained multiple on all of these software platforms that I have implemented into the company.
What about, here's a lot of people are suggesting for you and the last fellow, actually. 1 in 5 people now don't put their age on their CV.
No, I haven't put my age on since I was 50. And I don't say how many years experience, I just say extensive experience.
So it's only in the interview that you think age is kicking in then?
And I've taken off the age, the year that I went to university from my LinkedIn.
Yeah. So it's when you get to the interview stage then that you think the age becomes relevant?
Well, that is if you can get in front of a person,
yes,
and if you are talking to somebody who's 20 years younger than you, they just look at you. The second you walk in the room, they go, old person.
Yeah.
Even though I present young, right? I dress young.
No, that is the thing that's what I was trying to touch on in the introduction. I'm late for the news, Chloe, so I've got to crack on. But that idea of you walk in and because that's what Dan said yesterday. Dan was a nice bloke. Didn't cross his mind that what he was saying was going to land in some people's lives like an anvil, like a lead weight. Didn't land in mine because I don't want to be a plumber. I'm 29 years old. I don't hire people older than me because they don't like being told what to do. They might be perfectly happy to be told what to do by you, but he's making that decision. Someone walks in the room that looks 40, he's not getting a job. You walk in the room, you look 60, sayonara. Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines. It's 11:34. How do you know? Maybe you don't know. You just begin to fear. Maybe I have done you something of I've done you both a favour and a disservice this morning, because now you're thinking, crikey, maybe it's not just because we're waiting for the kids to go back to school. Maybe the reason that I'm not getting hired is because of my age. But I didn't think I was old. I didn't think I was over any hills. 50% of recruiters think that 57 is too old. But equally, 1 in 7 of those aged 18 to 35 said they'd been rejected because of their youth. 2 in 5 said they didn't put their age on a CV for fear of being perceived as too young. So really, you need to be between 35 and 57. I can't tell you I am. It doesn't feel that special. But otherwise, half of them are going to think you're too old and half of them are going to think you're too young. Which, I mean, some of it makes sense, I suppose. Here's an example of, people don't want to invest in training. But 57, you're going to be in the job for at least 10 more years. I said, please don't read my name. I always put that at the top of a message. If you put it at the bottom, the chances are that I will only get to it after I've read out the entire message and started by reading out your name. So that was close. James, please don't read my name, says John. That's not his name. I made that up. Recruiters don't want to invest in training workers over 55 because they don't like they don't think the investment will be paid back as much as it would be for younger workers. I'm 54 and lost out on a promotion to a 28-year-old, despite having management experience in my last role, while the other candidate had none. Recently, the hiring manager let slip that to get promoted, you need to be in your 30s. I'm going to have to build a side hustle, as I know my promotion days are over. Yeah, you are, actually. And Alyssa says, take off the amount of experience from your CV if you think it might be too much, and definitely never put your age on it. Well, that seems to be true at both ends of the age range. It's a tough one, isn't it? Philip's in Stanmore. Philip, what would you like to say?
Hello, James. Thanks so much for taking my call. It's always a pleasure to be on. We've spoken in the past. So I'm a photographer. I'm a freelance photographer, and I'm experiencing ageism. Absolutely. I'm in my 50s, right. And most of the people that I work with, predominantly women, are in their 20s and 30s. So there is a sort of significant age difference there. Yes. If I could break it into what I feel I'm good at, and then also to answer your question, how do I feel it? I know that's
how do you know? How do you know it's age?
Yeah. So just to give you an overview of how I feel I'm in a good place, and it's simply experience. I can reference the past, whether it's movies and art as a photographer.
Yes.
My understanding of a job, how to pace it, how to shoot, how to prioritize is great. I can work with people from every different walk of life, every religion, every country. I've shot all over the world. The stories and the experience that I bring to jobs is unparalleled. And I feel that I'm shooting the best stuff that I've ever shot.
Yes.
How I feel I talk to people better. I treat people with more respect because I'm slightly paranoid of offending. So I've sort of become even more careful. So I feel that I'm in a really good place and I can deliver. Now to answer, and I work in a mixture of fashion, portrait,
all of which, if it were entirely true and evident, would translate immediately into lots of work. But it isn't.
It would. And it's not that there is no work, but I am experiencing my age becoming an issue. Now, to answer your question, obviously, I give you some examples when I feel that I'm not fitting in, and it's the age element. So, for example, I don't socialize with my clients. In the past, I would go out with my clients and I'd get invited to events and parties. I might even date people within the world that I work in. That doesn't happen. It's very much turn up, shoot the job, go home. So I don't feel that I'm sort of part of the gang as such.
Right.
I also get the blank face back. So you say something, you might reference something from a movie or art or something, and they just stare at me because you know that they have no idea what you're talking about.
Yes.
Then you get the bit where I do say something a little bit dumb, and it's like, oh my gosh, why did I just say that?
Yeah.
I was actually released. I'm not going to say fired because I didn't have a contract, but there was one huge client I had, which basically I got a letter from their lawyer saying, I'm sorry, but we're not going to call you anymore. And it was over a couple of jokes, which I really didn't think were that bad.
Right.
But it's working in an ultra-sensitive environment. Now, I can...
Except to them, it's not.
Well, that's the issue, and I have to...
To them, it's normal.
I didn't, well,
they feel about you like you felt about Bernard Manning. I mean it. We talked about this yesterday. So you can be. I'd like to think of myself as a leader of the woke resistance, but there are young people in my life who think that I'm a dinosaur. So you've got to move. You've got to. I'm not saying you've done anything wrong, but it probably doesn't strike you immediately that you are now Bernard Manning to them. The world has turned. Things have changed.
Yeah.
So it's not. They're not hypersensitive. They're just them.
Yeah. What made it frustrating is that I have witnessed full-time people that work for that company doing far worse things and saying far worse things, and that's what's frustrating. But I didn't come back with those arguments because I figured it was done.
Well, you've got age plus freelance then equals problem.
It does, and I do.
When did it start? When did you first think, oh crikey? If I was a tree, I'd be counting my rings.
I would say probably about sort of 7 or 8 years ago.
It's a young industry that you're in.
Well, that's the other thing. So on that note, to also add to my point,
yes.
I understand that some of them look at me and essentially I look like their dad.
Yeah.
They look at me and I understand that they think, how can this guy do this job? How can he... the people are all young and cool and trendy. They look at me and think, how on earth can he do this? Yet, ironically, when I was an assistant back in the 90s, the photographers I assisted were my age now, and they totally delivered. I worked with lots of big famous photographers. I, was friends with people like Mario Testino and Terence Donovan and Michael Roberts.
Yes.
All of the people that I assisted were my age now, and they totally delivered. I think what's important is their way of thinking. So social media is crucial. So I see the benefit that they have, that they see how to reach clients in a way that I can't comprehend, and that's mostly social media. So I can sort of understand that, and they're beating me hands down on that.
I got a message off a lovely lad the other day. Was here doing some work experience not long ago, asking if I wanted him to take over my Instagram because he'd noticed I've only posted on it once. And I thought, don't be ridiculous. Then a little bit of me thought, I probably need to be on Instagram, don't I? I need to be done. It's all very well being massive on Twitter, but Twitter's ridiculous now that Elon Musk owns it. It's just sort of these people who pay for blue ticks. Now I sound like Victor Meldrew. So anyway, I might get back in touch with him. You raise valid points. And I remember saying to someone 15 years ago, I'm not getting involved in Facebook. It's all a load of nonsense. It'll never catch on. The idea of the social media, and that would be part of it. But you can have people our age or your age who are all over it. This got me. Thank you, Philip. Good luck, mate. I feel a bit impotent today when it comes to offering up warm words or encouraging words. Karen wrote this. I wonder if it's different for men or women. I don't know. James, is their face trying to disguise a mix of surprise and disappointment when you enter the room, when you enter the interview room? And of course, I now, for the last few years, all of my immediate sort of management above have been older than me, right up to the very top. I beg your pardon, younger than me, right up to the very top. But this isn't a normal industry by any stretch of the imagination. You walk into a room to be interviewed for a job and the person doing the interview is almost automatically in a position of seniority. Then age kicks in, right? You think, well, that's odd. And plumbing as well. This is where the whole conversation came from, or half of the conversation came from. Half of it came from the story in the news today. A 50-year-old plumber coming in for an interview with Dan in Reigate. So I'm not taking orders from no 20. Maybe I'm doing a disservice to plumbers. Maybe you wouldn't be particularly averse to the idea of taking orders from a 29-year-old, but I think you would be. I don't think you'd like it at all. So what else can you do? Marianne is in Chippenham. Marianne, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
I was job hunting earlier this year and found that I was often told that I was too experienced when
What does
I'd be
that
approached.
mean? What does that mean?
Well, I don't think it means anything. I think it means I'm too old. I'd, like a previous caller, removed an awful lot of my experience from my LinkedIn profile and CV. I don't show my age. I would be approached by an HR person for a job. They approached me. I'd have a really good initial interview, but when they went to put me forward for a second interview, they would come back with, they think you're too experienced.
Yeah.
And
So what do we think then? Do we
really
think, because you're clearly up to the job, so do we think they're worried that you won't be there for that for as long as somebody younger, or that if they invest in training you, then they won't get as much back on their investment? Or is there something subtler going on? Is there a sort of societal aversion to our ages?
I think it is very much ageism.
Right.
I think there's, because you're not given the opportunity to discuss how long you're going to planning on working. And in this day and age, we're all going to be working a lot longer than maybe 20, 30 years ago.
Yeah,
so I don't know when I'm going to be retiring. And also it's about that they say you're too expensive, but if they don't advertise or tell you what the salary on offer is, and you're asked what your salary expectations are, but not given the opportunity to say, but I'm quite happy to work for the salary that you're offering. So it's, again, either too old or too expensive or too experienced, which is a euphemism for too old.
Yeah, it is, and not necessarily logical. I mean, we're often trying to unpack things on the programme that are happening in society, looking for the logic, but there, as we often discover, there might not be any. It's just a sense, a feeling. It's probably evolutionary. You're no longer valuable to the herd, you know. You're no longer capable of going out and hunter-gathering, or you're no longer capable of producing the next generation, or of child. I don't know. I'm just looking for the prehistoric reasons why this might be happening. I might sound ridiculous, but I don't know. There must be all sorts of different things going on. But the madness of it, as with the young people we were talking about yesterday, the madness of it is that we are not only crying out for workers in almost every sector, we're also living through a period of epic racism towards people from other countries. So the urgency with which employers should be trying to fill vacancies is unlikely ever to be higher. Admittedly, look, growth and the economy could be doing a little better, but give the new fellas a chance, you never know. But in the context of vacancies and immigration rhetoric, the idea that you're discriminating against people already here because of their age is ridiculous, genuinely ridiculous, and yet here we are. Do you think anyone's prepared to put their hand up from the other side of the desk? Anyone's prepared to say, I didn't realise it, James. So this is interesting from Zosha, who doesn't go into loads of detail, but describes her business as having done some research in this area. And one of the main findings was that employers don't consider age diversity to be a problem in their organisations. So there might be evidence in front of them of a range of negative perceptions towards older applicants, but they don't think it applies to them. We get a lot of, quite rightly, a lot of instruction on discrimination on ethnic grounds or on gender grounds, but you don't get much. So it's not in the forefront of your mind when you're looking at things. So you thought, it's not a problem here, but it is. So have you been listening to the last 40 minutes or so and found yourself thinking, oh my days, I'm guilty? I bet when Karen walks into the room and she sees that face, that's my face. Because I'm 35 or I'm 40, and if someone walks in who looks like my mum or someone who walks in who looks like my dad, I feel uncomfortable. Oh, this has happened to me. This has happened to me. When you sort of think, this is wrong, this is the wrong way round. And that would make you push away, wouldn't it? You wouldn't lean into it and think, oh, this is exciting. You're 20 years older than me. Let's work out how we can work together. You'd be thinking, oh, I don't want to be. But this happened to me, a long time ago when I became show business editor of the Daily Express. And I'd completely forgotten. And I don't even know if I clocked it at the time. I'll tell you a bit more after this. 52 minutes after 11. I couldn't remember. You must have noticed me do that a bit. I hope I'm not doing it more as I get older. But I just had the feeling, the memory of the feeling of what it's like. And then I thought, how can you have a feeling about being about someone much older than you? And when you haven't, in this job, it's 20 years since. But when I was on the Express and I became show business editor, I was at a theatre first night. And the theatre critic came up to me, who'd been on the paper for a long time. He was much older than me, and he called me boss in front of other people. And I felt like a fraud. I felt uncomfortable, and I felt fraudulent. I found the idea of someone who was, in my mind, closer to my dad's age than me. I don't think he was, looking back, but when you're 28, you think everyone is Grandad Clive Dunn, don't you? But one of the theatre critics, there were a few on the paper, and he called me boss. And I remember I felt so wrong, so uncomfortable. So sometimes perhaps if we're discriminating against people because of their age from a position of youth, it's not unkind. It's more about a kind of the feeling at odds with the natural order of things. So if I had been required, if I'd done the job for long enough to need to hire another theatre critic, I wonder whether I would have felt comfortable hiring someone who was 20 years older than me. I honestly don't know. I think perhaps I would have felt uncomfortable and would therefore have gone for someone who I felt more entitled to be in charge of. There it is, isn't it? I don't feel entitled to be in charge of you. So I feel entitled to be in charge of you, and I feel entitled to be in charge of you. But my colleagues at the moment are much younger than me. I don't know. Maybe I'd changed as I get older. So if I had someone who was 65 coming in to produce the show, I don't know. And actually, they boss me around anyway, as you know, more than I boss them around. So this is moot. Josh is in Bath. Josh, what made you pick up the phone?
Oh yeah. So thanks for taking the call.
You're very welcome.
Basically, so I actually work in recruitment. So I'm on the other side of it. I'm actually 35 for reference. So probably one of the older recruiters out there these days.
So this is a recruitment agency.
Yes.
So you try and link candidates to vacancies.
Exactly that. And
right.
You know, I actually found it a little bit heartbreaking hearing a lot of the people that have called in so far, because it's pretty grim. And the person who called in UX, I'd be happy to take their details and try and help them. So I work in kind of tech and digital recruitment. Just for reference.
Can we do that? And he might not want us to, but can we make sure the chap in Bournemouth, if he wants to talk to Josh will see if he can. Thank you. That's very kind.
So no problem. But I guess my point, there's a couple of issues. I think one of the issues is the industry that I work in. I'm quite frustrated in the kind of industry in generally. I think most. I think I saw a stat recently on LinkedIn somewhere that the average age of a recruiter in the UK is 22 or 23.
That's insane.
There is, I know, right? And it's an incredibly high transactional. So people will come in 18, 19, sort of fresh out of uni, get a job and leave within sort of 6, 12 months.
Okay.
And I think they're often targeted by metrics to kind of, which I think remove the human from the actual side of what they're doing in this job. So it's all about getting CVs out. They've got to get a certain number of people out. And I think it's often why there's such a negative association with people in my industry, right? So I'm pretty sure that there is conscious or unconscious ageism going on there. The other point, and I read the article after listening to the show.
Right, just pause there, Josh. Right, Josh goes, that's what everyone should be doing. Can we have more of this, please? Can people start doing some research into the topics that we're discussing on the programme? I'll tell you what, if everyone does what Josh does, I could shave 10 minutes off my monologues and introductions, and that's what everyone would like that. Sorry, Josh, carry on. Thank you. Top of the class today, gold star.
Yeah, cheers, mate. The other thing was that actually I think in the survey, it wasn't just recruiters getting surveyed, it was actually people in HR, which surprised me.
That's right, yes.
So, from a recruitment perspective, we often get tasked rightly to make our kind of
more diverse
people that we send out. Yeah, exactly. DE&I, right? It's a huge topic, and I completely support it. But I think often that age is not included in that. I'm never getting targeted around the age of people. It's more around having a more diverse workforce, but that probably means more women, especially in technology. There's a huge issue around that.
Yeah.
And, people from more minorities.
Yeah.
And I think it's a great point, and I'm going to bring it up when I get...
We should be doing age as well. We should be putting age on the list as well. What about that thing I just described? Do you do face-to-face interviews in your work?
Yes. Yeah.
So when someone comes into the room who is your dad's age, does that feel wrong to you?
Do you know what? I suspect there is a bit of that. There's especially in tech. I'm just looking from that perspective. There's that whole tech bro culture, right? Where you've got a load of people all in their 20s and 30s that are incredibly bright, and then they get an older guy in. Are they giving them the time of day? It's an issue, and I suspect that there are. That is definitely going to be an issue that's out there. Even though people won't want to say it, they will use the whole too experienced or not the right culture fit will be the classic one.
That's what I've got. You've no idea how many times that's appeared in my inbox today. I wasn't even quite sure what it meant. Not the right culture fit.
Yeah.
Which just means you're too old and you'll look weird sitting next to all the young people.
Exactly. I think a lot of the time what it comes down to with DE&I is actually companies looking at themselves and saying, we want to be more diverse, but what does that actually mean? Are we set up as a culture to have a more diverse workforce and reap the benefits from that?
Yes.
And I think that we often are targeted to get more diverse shortlists, but it should be about the company and understanding why the benefits are and why they want
not the what, the why. So this will help. So diversity, equality, and inclusion for people who aren't familiar with the initialing. It is potentially to the benefit of absolutely everybody involved. But you're right. If you're seeing it as a box ticking exercise, then you're going to be A, doing it wrong, and B, not doing it to its optimal, to its most effect.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think
you're a thoughtful fella. Are you? I mean, I'm going to do your job for a bit now. Are you a bit professionally unfulfilled at the moment?
No, not particularly. No. I think I kind of pride myself in not being like that. If you know what I mean.
I do know what you mean.
I get frustrated by the industry. But then I think For me, it's all about the human interactions and the positive experience you can make. So
I bet you're very good at your job. A few people are balking at the idea that someone who's 22 or 23 years old can possibly have let me read you what Johnny wrote, the life experience to recruit talent. It's literally an oxymoron in action, but it's a skill set, right? That you can turn your hand to, even though you haven't got that much experience yourself.
Yeah, I mean, it's part of the issue, right? It attracts people because they think they can make a quick buck,
right.
And often people can, but it's often at the detriment to the candidates.
Got it.
And that's why there's such a bad reputation about it.
So what we want, really, is more Joshes.
I mean, you said it.
Thank you, mate. We'll talk again, I hope. 11:59 is the time. Just coming out to 12 noon. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Dee is very clear that she wants us to continue this conversation. I'm not sure we will be able to keep Dee happy. I've got a new feature that I need to launch in the next hour. We've got more humiliation. Well, is it humiliation? I don't know quite what you'd call it. But do you remember when Nigel Farage claimed that the parliamentary authorities had told him that he wasn't able to have constituencies in Clacton, and we all smelt... What's that stuff called that comes out of bull's bottoms? Well, anyway, we could all smell that. Well, he confirmed it yesterday, although in circumstances that I'm sure he would much rather have avoided, as effectively as he is currently avoiding doing surgeries in Clacton. So a little bit more detail on that. And we're either going to do pylons or atheism next. I might let you decide. Electricity pylons, not Twitter pylons. 3 minutes after 12. Humour is a very subjective thing, right? I mean, nobody can agree that something is funny. Or rather, there will never be a case when everybody thinks something is funny. Some people, for example, I'm told, some people don't find Mrs. Brown's Boys funny. That's extraordinary to me. How can you not find Mrs. Brown's Boys funny? Some people don't find Ricky Gervais funny, which is, to my mind, equally extraordinary. Some people find things funny that other people don't find funny. Some people find me funny. Funny ha-ha. Not funny peculiar. Whereas Keith has a face like a slap backsider for the entire 3 hours of the programme every day. So, this really made me laugh. So I said just before the break that we were going to, in the next hour, be discussing either atheism or pylons. And then I clarified, and this wasn't particularly funny, I clarified that we were talking about electricity pylons as opposed to Twitter pylons. Although I do suddenly realise that we have opened the door to the possibility of Ed Miliband, who is talking about pylons, going on Twitter and being subject to a pylon about pylons. That would possibly be the first pylon in the history of social media. Does anyone know, has Ed Miliband had a pylon on Twitter? Because he is suggesting that everybody should welcome the opportunity to have an electricity pylon in their garden, which we're probably not going to talk about this hour. But Merian has availed himself of the opportunity to crack what I consider to be a very good joke. Having established that we were either going to talk about atheism or electricity pylons in the next hour, he said, either way, you are discussing the need for a higher power. Yeah, I thought so too. I could hear your roars of laughter from all the way up here in Leicester Square. But thank you, Keith. Finally, better late than never. 5 minutes after 12 is the time. So I don't think that we can do an hour on whether or not you'd be happy living next door to an electricity pylon. Oh, I'm doing that. I think I've got to stop doing this. As soon as I say it out loud. So during the little break there, during the news, as you call it, during the news, we'll have a little chat, and I say, we can't get an hour out of electricity pylons. And I say it off air, it's like a decision. Say it off air, we're never going to get an hour. How are you going to get an hour? What are callers going to say? That's what we say to each other sometimes. What are callers going to say? You know, get an hour out of electricity pylons. As soon as I say it on air, I feel like I'm ducking a challenge. As soon as I say on it, we're never going to get... What are callers going to say? We're never going to get an hour out of electricity pylons. It's pylons, Greg, not piles. I could get an hour out of piles, but it's not radio you'd want to listen to, mate. I don't think, because it would just be the same, wouldn't it? Should we do... Can we... No, we can't do an hour. No. Would you like... What's it like living next door to an electricity pylon? Have you got a pylon in your garden? Not going to do it. Not going to do it. I'm going to put it there, all right, just in case we reach for it later. Got a new feature to launch this hour, with which I will need a little bit of your help. Oh, and I've got a missing word competition for you as well. Yeah, I know I need to get the actual topic up and running sooner rather. Oh, the feature. Sorry, we're doing. Hang on. There's people listening, Eleanor. We're having a staff meeting. We're having a production. So do you think we should? Yeah, but I need to get the phone in up first, and then we'll do the feature. All right. Everyone on board? Keith, you happy? That's the first. I want to do a quick. Can I not just do a very quick missing word headline? I'd need to find it first. I'll come back to that. So we got. No, here it is. This is great. All right. What's the missing word in this headline? Ready? Are you ready? Keith, you ready? Yeah. Falling blank knocked me out in Waitrose, and all I got was a £25 voucher. You're not allowed to enter if you already know the answer. If you don't know the answer, text me what you think it is. Falling cauliflower. Oops! I just gave it away. Thank you. That's why on Have I Got News for You, they actually blank out the thing on the thing. Did you hear what I said? Should we pretend that you didn't? Falling blank knocked me out in Waitrose, and all I got was a £25 voucher. 8 minutes after 12. 20 years. We're going to talk about atheism. Although I think we just provided some evidence that there probably is a God. And the reason why I'm drawn to the atheism question is twofold. The statistics we should probably establish first. Britain is entering its first atheist age as parents increasingly fail to pass on religious beliefs to their children. It's the largest study of its kind. And previous studies have apparently underplayed the growth of atheism. It's difficult to define, not least because if you ask me whether I believe in God, I can't really tell you. So the overlap between atheism, agnosticism, and those who have some form of spirituality without following any particular religion is enormous. So agnosticism, historically, is, well, I don't really know. So you're not an atheist. There's definitely nothing. There is definitely nothing going on. There is no heaven. There is no hell, there's no afterlife, there's no soul, there's no spirit, there's nothing. Atheism, from dust to dust. Actually, that's a religious quote. That doesn't really help, does it? But that's it. That's all there is. Well, what did Philip Larkin call it? You remember. So children strewn on steps and women coming for, and sense the solving emptiness that lies just under all we do, and for a second get it whole, so permanent and blank and true. That's atheism. Permanent, blank and true. And sense the solving emptiness that lies just under all we do. And for a second get it whole, so permanent and blank and true. And the last line of that poem is an even clearer distillation of atheism. It says, dulls to distance. Yeah, reminds us what is left to come, and dulls to distance all we are. So all we are, in fact, that whole poem is about atheism. I've never realised that before. The whole of Ambulances is about atheism, isn't it? It's one of my favourite poems. I love it. I thought it was about kind of humanity, but it's about atheism. It's about there being no God. Oh, 10 past. I can't do the whole poem, can I now, off the top of my head? But close like confessionals they thread, loud noons of cities giving back, none of the glances they absorb. Like glossy grey arms on a plaque, they come to rest on any curb. All streets in time are visited, and then children strewn on steps and path, and women coming from the shops past smells of different dinners see the wild white face that overtops red stretcher blankets momently as it is carried in and stowed, and sense the solving emptiness that lies just under all we do, and for a second get it whole, so permanent and blank and true. Anyway, so that's atheism. Agnosticism is, I don't know. There might be, there might not be. It's like Boris Johnson and Brexit. You prepare 2 columns. The one God exists, one God I don't know. Who am I? Who am I to judge on whether or not there's a God or not? And then you've got spiritualism, which is the sort of sense there must be more to it than this. And you might have had some strange experiences where you're pretty confident that you received a message from another dimension or whatever that might be. So nailing atheism is a little tricky, although we are clear here on exactly what it means. It means you are absolutely certain that there is no God. Right? Imagine all the people. And not passing it on to your children is why we are living now in the first atheist age. And I want to know two things. I want to know why you didn't pass it on to your children. Okay? 0345 6060973. You could use words like indoctrinate or brainwash or whatever you prefer. But I'm thinking more that you had a gentle faith. You didn't give it an awful lot of thought, but when you did, you quite liked the idea of seeing your nan again in heaven. And religion was such an intrinsic part of our society. It's a shame, isn't it? It's another area where the racists have kind of stolen something from us by banging on about Judeo-Christian values when really they just want you to hate all Muslims. Which is odd given that Islam is an Abrahamic religion just like Judaism and Christianity. But anyway, I digress slightly. That idea of your mum and dad that maybe didn't take you to church, but they certainly on Christmas, just an idea. You said your prayers at bedtime. Right? All of that. Normal 1970s, 1980s, early 1990s childhoods. Why didn't you do it? Why didn't you do it? Did you even notice? Have you even noticed until now that you haven't done it? So we always said prayers at bedtime when I was little. Didn't do it with my kids. But they went to Catholic primary school. We went to church a lot. But didn't hand on religion in the same way that my dad handed it on to me. Didn't hand on the guilt. Maybe that's part of the answer to the question. I didn't hand on the guilt. The Catholic guilt. The guilt I'd get if I didn't go to church. Didn't hand that on. So, question number one, why did you not pass on religious beliefs to your children? All right, 0345 6060973. Question number two. Here's a place I've never been to before. What happens when you fully embrace and acknowledge atheism, having been a believer, having previously been a believer, whether you were a hardcore believer or whether you were a kind of habitual. It would have been very hard for me growing up not to believe in God, right? My first school was a convent. So my first headmistress was a nun. My second school was a Catholic school that had very close links with the local Catholic church. So I was an altar server. I was in the Guild of St. Stephen. I can do things with a thurifer that you wouldn't believe. Do you know what a thurifer is? It's like the incense holder on the chain. Yeah, well, so I could do a figure of 8 with that, which only about 3 kids a year were allowed to even try. And then I went to a monastic school. So my final school was run by monks. So my headmaster was a monk. My housemaster was a monk. My Latin teacher was a monk. There's monks everywhere. And so it was not until adolescence, really, that it even crossed your mind to question any of it. And then if you're in the environment that I grew up in, you even have moments where you think you might have a vocation. Oh, Lord, I think God wants me to be a monk. That's the level of quiet faith that is inculcated in you, or indoctrinated, whatever you prefer. And then you live with it. So it might be that you had a much more religious upbringing than mine. So I went to church, I went to religious schools, and we went to church on Sundays. But you might have been in a religion where you are going to church several times a week. I miss elements of my life when I had more faith than I have now, but I could go back to that again. When my dad died, my faith went through the roof. I went to church more, I think, when my dad died than I had for 20 years. And I've never called myself an atheist, and I don't know that I ever will. And I have no way of knowing how much of that is nurture and how much of that is nature. It's got to be mostly nurture. But if you are hearing me describe you as somebody who grew up with faith, grew up with your parents' religious beliefs, what was it like to acknowledge atheism? Good or bad? Because I can see how intellectually you might have been led there, but emotionally I can think of it as being quite a lonely moment in your life. Losing that sucker, so I still talk to Jesus, which you may well find ridiculous. Whether it counts as praying or proof of a belief in God, or just the way in which I also talk to my dad sometimes, particularly in church. It's like a form of meditation for me. It just keeps me grounded. I've got a lot going on. Sometimes working it out in your own head is like internal therapy. And it's a lot easier to work it out in your own head if you have an interlocutor, someone that you're talking to, Keith. And that way your own thoughts can be ordered a lot more easily, a lot more pleasantly. But does that count as praying? Just because the name I've given, the entity with whom I'm having this conversation is sometimes Jesus. And for me, Jesus was always just perfection, like the ultimate being, somebody who was perfect, someone who was untouched by sin, by avarice, by greed, by bitterness, by all of the things that define the human condition in many ways. So I don't know. And that's why I'm not sure I would ever, however powerfully I could argue against the existence of X, Y, or Z, I don't know that I would ever really be able to stand up and state I am an atheist. So there are two questions for you. Why didn't you pass on your religious beliefs to your children? 0345 6060 973. And what is it like to lose your faith? Anthony says it's like a bereavement. Other people will feel that it was an enormous liberation, which is why it's a good question for me to ask you, because every answer will be different. What's it like to either embrace atheism or lose your faith? Even the way that I choose those words speaks to the difference in emotional response to the same phenomenon. What's it like? 0345 6060 973. Jamie says, you think that becoming an atheist means you lose something. It's quite the opposite, James. My life does have meaning. No, just for me, I'd lose that person to talk to in my mind. But I could give them another name. I could call them John or Rastapopoulos or Keith. Imagine if Keith didn't exist and he was just something that I use as a conversational and meditative tool in the course of the 3 hours that we spent together today. Would that mean that Keith is a cult? Does Keith become a religion at this point? If he didn't exist, but we spoke as if he did, and we directed comments towards him? Is he a cult or a religion? I'm not saying that word again. 19 minutes after 12 is the time. Come at this from whatever angle you like, but come at it sincerely. Come at it honestly, and don't be mean. And you can be mean. If religion ruined your life, you are allowed to say so. But for an awful lot of people, it remains a force for enormous good and a power for enormous good. And I quite like it that way. It's 12:19. 12:22 is the time. This is the first time that Britain has really been in an atheist age, since at least religion arose among us. And I want to know, we won't do the question of the effect that will have on society because we don't know, but I am interested in the relationship you have with it, atheism, which a couple of people are telling me I've got wrong, actually. I may even have got atheism wrong. A theist believes that a God exists. An atheist doesn't believe that God exists. It doesn't necessarily mean you're convinced that there is no God. You just don't believe that there is. A Gnostic is a knowledge claim. So I know. And then agnostic means I don't know. So if you weren't confused already, you will be now. Paul's in Ackworth. Paul, what made you pick up the phone?
Well, I think in a way, my youth may have been, apart from the private school element,
yes,
quite similar to yours.
We were both in Yorkshire. Well, yes. So we've got the geography on our side, if not that's the socio-economic. Right. God.
But I was still serving on the altar as an altar boy at the age of 18,
Whoa.
Just before I went to university.
Yeah.
I was doing 3 masses a week because there'd be a Thursday night one, there'd be a Saturday evening one, and a Sunday one.
Gosh.
When I went to university, my faith was challenged. I saw how other faiths operated, how fundamentalist Christians operated, and the hatred they had for Catholicism.
Right.
And the very fact that I saw that their faith was dubious made me for the first time ever, question mine.
Right.
Then I got all philosophical about it, talked with my friends who were atheists and such. Yes. But then it was 15 years before I could actually let go of it and say, I am an atheist. Because I'd been given this tool to go to confession, to go to mass during difficult times in your life.
Yeah.
And I didn't know what I was supposed to do without that tool.
Well, it was a great comfort to you, though. It was a great boon to your existence.
All through your 20s, all sorts of things happening. You lose girlfriends, you struggle at university in exams, whatever happens. And mine that, and it worked. It worked. I mean, now I think it's like a placebo effect, but it worked. It helped me get through things. So the last stages were literally me arguing. This is as I'm now in my mid-30s, still going to Mass. I was saying that faith, it's not actually believing in a God. No, it's wanting to believe in a God. And I knew I wanted to believe in a God. Until finally I thought, hang on, that's a nonsense. You don't believe in a God.
And all of the things...
saying I want to play the game isn't belief.
All of the things that we describe as a boon or a benefit that could easily be found elsewhere without the attendant question of faith and belief. So support
but when you're young,
and succor. I know that, I know that, but I'm just so that's why sometimes when a few years ago, if I veered into the realms of religion, I used to unintentionally upset people, Paul. And I don't like unintentionally upsetting people because they would feel I was judging them and saying that somehow the things that they had found comfort in were worth less than the things that I found, which was never my intention, and it's certainly not my belief or yours. But because that was all we knew for all of our formative years, if you feel a certain way, you do a certain thing, and that thing was Mass or church.
Yeah. I now find myself in the position with two boys, 13, and one has turned 16 today.
Oh, happy birthday.
They weren't baptised. They've never gone to church. My partner's not religious. She was brought up an atheist. And I look at them and think, you're just as morally grounded, just as good as I ever was. Yeah. If not better.
That's the point I was just trying to make, actually. That's the point I was trying to make. They're doing the right thing for the right reasons. They're not doing it because they're frightened of getting struck by lightning.
Yes.
Metaphorically.
I'll tell you one story about him, my youngest. This blew my mind. When he was about 6, he came home from school. Well, actually, no, that's the wrong way to describe it. I found a piece of paper that he must have brought with him home from school. I don't know when it came back. And his school was it wasn't a faith school. It wasn't, aligned with any particular faith. It wasn't even a Church of England school. It had a prayer on it with bad spelling that said, "Please God, from Thomas M., do not flood the earth again." And I thought, he's praying to the God of the Old Testament not to destroy humanity. And he's 6, and he's meant to be going to a non-faith school. And I thought, wow, what a lesson. Not only, they're not telling him the nice part about Jesus and such. No. He's going away with
Noah's Ark,
writing little prayers.
Yeah, I'd never thought of Noah's Ark as being a traumatic story or a traumatizing now. Oh my God, every time it rains, the poor lad would have been running up to the attic.
Yeah.
Oh,
6 years old.
And
it was brilliant.
Have you lost anything?
I miss going to church.
Yeah.
I can't go. I would like to go.
Yeah.
I would like to sit there. But talk about two-faced. I feel like it would be so wrong
like
for me
the private
to sit there
education.
amongst those.
This is like the private education conversation for the first hour. I want all of the benefits, but I recognise the inauthenticity of it all, or something. Yeah. Well, I don't know that. Paul wrote in just before you came on and said, I'm agnostic. I go to church every week because my wife, also my son, enjoys playing with the other kids. I find all the dogma a bit ridiculous, but I enjoy going. I enjoy, becomes a habit. But you would feel fraudulent if you did that.
Yeah, because it would be nothing to do with God anymore. I mean, I may have gone a little bit. I mean, as you were saying, atheist is not having a belief. It's not the same as saying I don't believe.
Yes.
But I've gone beyond. I think I'd probably say I'm an anti-theist now. I actually do not. I believe there is no God. Do you see what I mean?
I do.
I can't really back it up.
No. Well, nor can the other side. That's the whole point. Hey, do you know what Marita said about your boy's poem?
What?
She said that's a prayer about climate change.
Wow. Well, maybe so.
He was ahead of his game.
Maybe they made a link in the class, and because he's 6, he didn't.
Yeah.
I mean, I put that on Facebook, And an old religious friend of mine said, "Oh, I hope that everyone gets on their knees and prays to God." And I was thinking, I think she's missed my point altogether. Yeah. I don't want my boy praying to a cruel God of the Old Testament.
No, exactly. And thinking that, he could be smote in a moment for for any transgression or indiscretion. You've reminded me of something that I haven't thought about in years, actually, talking about your little one. By far, bizarrely, because we mentioned Twitter earlier, by far the biggest tweet I have ever done in my life is a bit linked to what Paul, and it was something I probably shouldn't have done in retrospect because I was breaching a little bit of confidence, but one of mine did something similar at a very, very similar age that speaks to exactly the same themes that you just described. I haven't thought about that in ages. Paul, thank you, mate. It's coming up to 12:30. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Amelia Cox has your headlines. It is 33 minutes after 12, and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. So this is the new feature, okay? You've got half an hour to come up with a better name than the one that we have got. The name I've got at the moment is the antidote, or the fire extinguisher. And I just find myself sometimes listening to or watching coverage of stories that I know, because I am a bit of an anorak, is missing some crucial constituent that gives the story that is being shared a weight or an impact that it categorically doesn't deserve. And I just thought we should start. I mean, we've always done it, but I thought perhaps we should start doing it in a slightly more formal way, which generally means that we will ask for a sound effect and not get one, and come up with a comedy name that's actually not that funny. That's what usually happens on this programme when we get when we launch a feature. Sometimes they cut through. Sometimes they last. They sustain. They have a shelf life. So there are at least 3 examples of this today, and it's pretty damning actually that I think all 3 of them appeared on the front page of one of your daily newspapers. And what I want to do is A, get you to come up with a name, and B, that's it, isn't it? Yeah, no, you just need to come up with a name. There's no B. Oh, by the way, the missing word was cauliflower. I don't know if you noticed that the poor lady in Waitrose got hit on the head with a cauliflower, and all she got was a £25 voucher. If you're just tuning in, we had some fun with this. It was a brilliant missing word game, probably the best ever. Falling what, I said, knocked me out in Waitrose, and all I got was a £25 voucher. And the answer was cauliflower. Who could ever have guessed that was falling cauliflower? There's even a picture of her. She doesn't appear to have a particularly large lump on her head. Knocked me out in Waitrose, and all I got was a £25 voucher. I need the Chagos story. I haven't got the Chagos story in front of me. I thought I'd cut it out of the paper. Well, I probably have, but then I lost it. So where should we begin? Let's begin with this fella, because he's always up to something, isn't he? Do you remember when Nigel Farage claimed, in this very studio, actually, shortly before I issued a cheery hello to him from the other side of the table, do you remember when he was telling us about why he couldn't do constituencies in Clacton?
Who's that advice come from?
Well, the Speaker's office.
Lindsay Hoyle's office.
And beneath the Speaker's office, there is a security team who give advice and say you should do some things and not do others. So we're not...
In the shimmer of fragrances, when promises are made, golden hues whisper in the guardian's shade, under desert skies, where the sun's fire glows, red sands gleam and golden flows. A vow is held in the heart's embrace, guardians oath, time cannot erase.
The fit state to do the old-style surgeries.
I said to a colleague immediately that happened, I said, could you get onto the Speaker's office, please, and just establish that that's not true? And we did. But yesterday, credit to the Press Association for actually asking Farage himself
Chris McKeon, Press Association. Nigel, a few weeks ago you said that the Speaker's Office and the Parliamentary Security Team had given you advice not to hold in-person constituency surgeries. Speaker's Office says this didn't happen. Parliamentary Security can find no record of such advice being given. Which one of you is lying?
The Speaker's Office is always right. Thank you.
Which one of you is lying? Couldn't even give a straight answer to that question. So yesterday he chose the first anniversary, of course, of the October the 7th terror attack in Israel to launch an attention-seeking nonsense about what they like to call two-tier policing. You'd think that Farage would have learnt the dangers of casting aspersions upon policing in this country, given what happened last time he did so, but apparently not. So claiming that there is some sort of mystery about the lack of prosecution of two men involved in an incident with police that has been broadcast on CCTV video. I told you some time ago that quite a few people had asked me about this, and so I'd done what I always do in such situations and asked an expert. I asked on this occasion a very well-known criminal, beg your pardon, a very experienced criminal barrister to tell us what was going on, and he said that the file would almost certainly have been handed to the CPS. The police would have concluded their investigation. It's very complicated, not least because there's also some CCTV footage that appears to show a police officer attacking one of the men involved in the incident, and no charges had been brought, quite possibly because there'll be a police investigation into the actions of the police as well. So there's absolutely no mystery here. However, I came this morning I came across some coverage which completely missed out the following statement from Greater Manchester Police. We have passed a file to the Crown Prosecution Service in mid-August. So the CPS is now. So someone is popping up, attacking the police for not having brought charges against someone, which is not a decision that the police make. And the file was given to the Crown Prosecution Service in mid-August. They added, "We've avoided providing ongoing commentary on the case, including releasing footage, to ensure that justice can be served without the risk of prejudicing proceedings." Now, that paragraph should be in all the news coverage. Indeed, it was in all the news coverage at midnight last night. All of it. And yet, quite extraordinary to come across people pretending either that wasn't included in all the news coverage or that it was something that you might be unaware of. So Nigel Farage doing what Nigel Farage always does. So that's one example of the antidote. So the rest of the media presents a story in a disingenuous or even dishonest way, and we come with the truth. We come with the facts. What are we going to call this feature? Because there's another one. There's a quite extraordinary story, also inevitably perhaps on the front page of the Telegraph, warning that 1 in 5, is it? I mean, a huge proportion of millionaires, a fifth of UK millionaires are about to be driven out of the country. So you read that and you think, gosh, that's bad. Where did that story come from? And it then says, if you read further into it, research from the Adam Smith Institute think tank. So this is what suggests millionaires are leaving because of increased day-to-day taxation. Now, the Adam Smith Institute is one of those opaquely or secretly funded organisations that gravitate around Tufton Street in Westminster and refuse or fail to disclose who their sponsors are, who actually pays their wages. Would you believe that in 2012, the man that actually founded the Adam Smith Institute wrote the following: "We slipped easily into working with the IEA, the CPS and the National Federation of Small Businesses. It was a huge help that we had some press support. The Telegraph sketch writers were very much on side, as were the leader writers from the Telegraph, the Times, the Daily Mail and others. We had hardly any friends in radio or television, however." Goodness me, how that has changed. And this is what he describes his work as. This is Madsen Piri, president of the Adam Smith Institute, and a quote entirely missing from all the coverage today, claiming that 1 in 5 millionaires are about to leave the country as a consequence of as yet unannounced Labour economic policies. "We propose things which people regard as being on the edge of lunacy," said Madsen Piri. "The next thing you know, they're on the edge of policy." So the idea that is a news story rather than a optimistic punt from an opaquely funded organisation in the environs of Westminster's Tufton Street is, well, I let you reach your own decisions about what we should call this new feature. And then the other story is about the is about Chagos, which has been covered in incredible detail all over the place. You'll be aware of this. The last Conservative government started negotiations with which the Chagos Islands would be surrendered, if you like that kind of language, to Mauritius. And it was claimed, I think, again on the front of the Telegraph or possibly the front of the Times, that this was infuriating America and that Joe Biden would be, and the article didn't mention the statement from Joe Biden. I heard again some coverage on television and radio, not mentioning a statement from the actual White House applauding and welcoming the decision that we were being told by some elements of the UK media was an absolute disaster. And fair play to Tony Diver, the US editor of The Telegraph, because it is the newspaper that is home to way more unhinged headlines than any others. But some of the men and women working on the news side of the operation still do extremely good work. Well, it turns out that Joe Biden actually put pressure on the UK to give up the Chagos Islands because they were worried about the airstrip on Diego Garcia, the Diego Garcia air base. So under the deal, Mauritius takes control of the islands, but Britain and the US rent the base for another 99 years. So far from it being something that annoyed our allies in America, as the Times claimed, it was something that they were actually instrumental in helping to bring about. So what are we going to call this feature? Marita says you could call it The Truth. I don't know that that's catchy enough. I wanted to call it The Antidote, but Eleanor thought that was a bit pompous. She came up with The Fire Extinguisher, which I just thought was rubbish. So at the moment, I'm going with The Antidote. So, but what sound effect could you have for an antidote? It'd just be weird, wouldn't it? Like the sound of a syringe. So, yeah. So what are we going to call it? Headline Histrionics from Andy. It's not The Truth Files. Pest Control. Pest Control's quite good. No? We don't like pest control? You don't like anything. The Actuality. I'm not saying that, JW, and I know exactly what you were trying to get me to say out loud by putting those. The Lighthouse. Guffbusters. Guffbusters. Do we like Guffbusters? Guffbusters works for me. There's quite a lot of suggestions coming in. The Bonkers Debunkers suggests. Anyway, thank you. We'll keep an eye on this and we will work our way through it. The favourite so far, Misinformation. And that's from Cameron. That's pretty strong. And that was the other irony about what Farage was up to yesterday. He was supposedly talking about misinformation, spoiler alert, there hasn't been any, while actually indulging in or being busted for misinformation of his own, spoiler alert. Nobody told him not to have constituency service surgeries in Clacton. Jo Cox's sister Kim has constituency surgeries in her old constituency up in Batley. Kim Ledbetter. She manages, having buried her sister, who, of course, was assassinated by a far-right terrorist, shouting Britain first, just hours after Farage unveiled his breaking point poster in the middle of the Brexit debate. So she can manage constituency surgeries, but Farage wanted you to believe that he'd been told not to by parliamentary authorities. Let me just remind you exactly what happened when the Press Association asked him about the truth of those claims that he made in this studio just a couple of weeks ago.
Chris McKeon, Press Association. Nigel, a few weeks ago you said that the Speaker's Office and the Parliamentary Security Team had given you advice not to hold in-person constituency surgeries. Speaker's Office says this didn't happen. Parliamentary Security can find no record of such advice being given. Which one of you is lying?
The Speaker's Office is always right. Thank you.
Some lovely suggestions coming in. Truth bomb. The truth gets its trousers on. Alternative truths. Out. Liars. Barry says a propaganda at the propaganda. Get it? We'll return to that tomorrow with a selection and a shortlist and possible suggestions for sound effects. But what I want you to do, I've got a folder. So I want you, I've got two folders now. The red folder is for stories that we haven't done yet but quite like the look of. And the grey folder is for stories that will fit into the new feature that is currently unnamed. And so I want you to suggest things to me that need to be included in the unnamed feature. Unnamed feature. That will possibly be called Misinformation, because I can tell that Eleanor thinks that's brilliant. Much better than my suggestion of the antidote, and God knows how much better than her suggestion of the fire extinguisher. It's 12:48. Back to the question of atheism. And, your relationship with it, I suppose, and indeed your relationship with your children and the decision not to pass on the religious beliefs that had been passed on to you. Anthony is in Broughton, again in Northamptonshire. Anthony, what would you like to say?
Hi, yeah. So I became atheist sort of overnight, really. My father passed away 20 years ago, and on his last night we called the priest. And the priest came to the house. I answered the door. And he goes, Mr. Montgomery. I was like, yes, that's me. And he's like, no, Patrick Montgomery. I'm like, no, he's upstairs in bed, dying. And so he pushed past me, went upstairs, came back 15 minutes later. I said, everything okay? And he was, no, couldn't read the last rites to my father.
And you'd summoned him to do the last rites, had you?
Pretty much, yeah. My father was a devout Catholic all his life.
Right.
Brought us up as Catholics. I went to nuns' convent in Malta and dedicated his life to the church. And he was just denied. And the reason the priest gave was he'd been divorced.
I knew it.
And it's like, seriously, his whole life's been dedicated to your church, and that's what you can say.
You were also quite unlucky, just in terms of generations, because that 40 years ago, that would have been an unsurprising story. 20 years ago, he'd have been an outlier, I think, even among his own community.
Absolutely. But it made it even better when we went to the funeral, and the priest kept us waiting outside for half an hour. He was late. We were kept outside in the rain. And then when he did eventually let us into the church, he did the whole sermon to the congregation and pretty much ignored the family. So it was just a really bizarre time.
But I mean, in a way, if I were an evangelist or a recruiter, I'd be pointing out you shouldn't let one bad person turn you against all of the benefits that your late father saw in religion, and indeed in that religion specifically.
True, but then all the stories come out about the Catholic priests and so forth, and everything on top of that, and it's just like...
What are we supposed to be honouring here? What are we supposed to be pledging our allegiance to?
Exactly, and hypocrisy springs to mind.
Doesn't it just? And did you feel you've lost anything, or was it a liberating experience to think, well, I'm not giving you the time of day anymore, or did you...
It's made me more open-minded. My girlfriend's Muslim.
Okay.
And I'm very intrigued to learn a lot more about her culture and religion. She's Tunisian.
Yeah.
And it's really sort of made me more open-minded about other cultures, not blinkered and just focused on one.
Interesting, isn't it? Because we are taught that indeed almost all religions, not all, but almost all religions are taught that everyone else is wrong and we're right, which is daft, essentially.
Daft, and it's
dangerous.
It's amazing the parallels between the stories and the religions.
Yes.
There's so many parallels. So the fact that they're so different to us is neither here nor there.
Of course.
The stories are pretty much the same.
And so there would be no question in your mind about the wisdom or otherwise of doing what your dad did and passing on your abandoned or destroyed religious beliefs to the next generation. That's just a no-no.
Yeah, and ironically, my son goes to a religious school.
What was it you were saying about hypocrisy?
Exactly that.
There's a lot of it about. Thank you, Anthony. It's 12:52. So I got sent this by about half a dozen people. Thank you, and I'm sorry for your loss. That's a horrible thing to experience. I'd got a family friend who wasn't a very, very devout woman who married a divorcee. She wasn't even divorced herself, and the local priest made her life awful, wouldn't give her communion, wouldn't sort of accept her as a proper member of the Catholic community. So that did used to go on an awful lot. It still does in some quarters, but that power has diminished during the course of our lives, hasn't it? So I got sent this by a few people. Neil, and I didn't know what was going on. Do you know, how much attention have you been paying to the last half an hour of the programme? Shall we find out? Okay, I'm going to read you something. And sense the solving emptiness that lies just under all we do, and for a second get it whole, so permanent and cauliflower and true. I'm not going to explain that. I'm just going to say thank you to everybody who sent in variations on that gag, including Eleanor, the producer, who put it on my screen, and I was completely confused by what was going on. I had absolutely no... In fact, I had to just ask before I spoke to Anthony, why does everyone keep sending me this line about so permanent and cauliflower and true? If you know, you know. If you don't, just listen back on Global Player to the last half an hour of the programme and see if you can work it out, okay? Ruxana is in Birmingham. Ruxana, what made you pick up the phone?
Your call about atheism.
Yes.
And I'm a secret atheist. I was brought up as a Muslim.
You know you're on the radio, don't you?
Yes, no, I'm no longer it's no longer a secret.
You can play that again. Go
because
on.
I do see the humour of it,
Yes,
really. Because I do enjoy all the sort of rituals. I love Ramadan.
Yes.
But I'm still an atheist.
Yes.
But I can't openly say that. It's just
to your family, to your closest community. Yes,
exactly. It's too offensive for them. So, but it's not. It doesn't cause me any sort of discomfort.
What happened? What happened? Can you remember?
I think I was brought up in very much an Islamic woman way of life, which it is fine, but it wasn't for me.
Okay.
And I wanted to explore and see the world and live differently.
And the rationale for some of the privations in all religions, particularly for women, is that this is what God wants.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it seemed, sorry to say it like this, but it seemed a little bit ridiculous to me. That's the only way I can. No disrespect.
No, but
anyone
when did it start to seem a little bit ridiculous? Not at primary school or a bit later, or when?
But when I wanted to, when you're at school and the teachers talk to you about what you want to do, and I talk about, well, I want to work in fashion.
Yes.
And that didn't seem to mix well with following the religious path that was set out for me.
Okay.
And yet I'm being encouraged to pursue my education and my career development, which fortunately I did, but I couldn't do that. And I have to use the word restrictions.
Of course, there's nothing wrong with that word, but I understand your sensitivity. How much did God come into it? How much did you find yourself thinking, I'm pretty sure that if there is a God, this isn't what he wants for me? Or did you think, I'm pretty sure there isn't a God, or I don't think there's a God?
Right. I think it was, well, when I looked at my examples of how I was being brought up, that, okay, yes, you're constantly telling me there is a God and we have to do what God expects from us.
Yes.
However, on the other hand, there are other things that I find really wrong.
Yes.
As in unethical.
Yeah, of course.
The way people backchat, the way they treat others. And I just sort of based how I live my life on being a good human. And I didn't quite understand where God came into that for me.
And roughly how old were you when this happened, if you don't mind me asking?
Oh, no, I don't mind. I reckon I was probably going into college, so about 17, 18. And then it took
I bet a lot of people are in a similar place. They just haven't given as much energy to thinking about it that you have. They're just, I'll just crack on with it. What's the point of causing any problems? I don't need to formalise my thinking. I'll just go along with the flow. But somewhere inside it all feels a bit iffy. But you wanted more than that. You wanted to philosophically stamp something.
Yeah. I wanted to understand hang on, I needed to understand how to think for myself. And that it's okay to do that.
Yeah. There it is. Yes.
Yeah. Just figure it out for myself.
And lots of people with faith listening will say it's not mutually exclusive. You can figure stuff out for yourself and still believe in God, and they're right.
Yes. It's just
but it wasn't for you.
My path was different.
Well, it's a good job you've never told anyone then, isn't it?
Exactly. It's a big secret. Don't tell anyone, James.
Hang on. I'm just talking to everyone else listening now. All right, all 1.4 million of them every week. Don't mention Ruxana's religious journey, all right?
Exactly. It's only because I trust you, James. I thought I can share it with you.
That is a relief. I might tell Sheila, but I won't tell anybody else.
You can tell Sheila I love her too.
There we go. It's coming up to 12:59. You've been listening to James O'Brien on LBC. And indeed, that is probably the best advertisement ever for Global Player, the bit I was doing just before Ruxana came on. You want to work out why that line about so permanent and cauliflower and true was A, so funny, and B, completely confused me, then you will be able to work it out by listening back to the last half hour of the programme. But not until Sheila's finished. Because if you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, where you can also pause and rewind live radio, as well as listen to a range of podcasts. So do download it now for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Tom Swarbrick will be with you at 4, but now it's Sheila Fogarty.